The harmonious cries filled the room, thrilling her and making her fall in love. It was almost like the song she loved that her mother used to sing to her as a girl. The lyrics having no words, but having power alone from the sound of them. The tears that pricked her green eyes became never-ending and had nothing at all to do with the strenuous pains of giving birth she just went through. It had everything to do that she and Jamie had brought twins into the world, twins. Two forms of life who are akin to being one, just like them. Another pair of twins for the world to come to know. They would be Lannisters by blood, stronger than the Baratheon they would have by name. They would have all that should have been Jaime and Cersei's long ago. These twins would be royalty at birth and would continue the line of succession all the way until there was no more. The next Targaryens, she hoped, except stronger this time around. She smirked at the idea that Robert would think he would be continuing the lineage of Baratheons. He just had no idea that those thoughts of his were purely false. Lannisters, lions, will continue to rule from here on out. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The Queen's heart started beating triple time as she let her hands wipe away her face. "Let me hold them," she said eagerly, preparing herself to be taken away by the beauty of her newborn children. It was nearly impossible for her to control the excitement coursing through it. It completely overshadowed the indescribable, throbbing pain between her legs, surprisingly. It was clear that her body was indeed tired because birthing two children at once was a pain, an experience, that hardly many people knew. Cersei had gotten an absolute feel of what her mother once went through when she gave birth to her and Jaime. How tired and pained her mother must have been. After doing something this powerful, she lost her life giving birth to that ugly, little imp of a brother of hers. That being said, this only intensified her hatred for him, but it numbed when Maester Pycelle slowly brought the two bundles closer to her. He placed one in each arm. Cradling in her left was a tiny thing with a straight, blonde hair that slicked itself to his little head. She knew it to be a boy as soon as she first laid eyes on him. It relieved her to know that she had played her game faithfully and did not end up having a child that was Robert's. Cersei nearly feared to see a mop of Baratheon black on a baby's head. A part of her, small and fragile that she wished didn't exist, might have believed he would treat her better if the child was his. It didn't really matter since he buried himself in the cold tundra of her heart when he said Lyanna Starr's name while inside her those years ago. Nothing in this world could he do to rectify that, of that she was sure. Her heart skipped a beat at the quick thought that what laid in her right arm was a girl. As soon as Cersei turned her golden-maned head, she froze. Upon her eyes was everything she didn't want, black of hair. Upon this tiny thing's head was a tuft of black hair that curled itself on this baby's small head. It cemented that this was a child of Robert's. Her eyes snatched themselves away from her and then looked back at her blonde boy and then back at her girl. She wondered if she had somehow gotten herself pregnant with both Robert and Jaime's children at once. Was that even possible? For the twins to have two different fathers? Had she gone wrong when she was supposed to drink her moon tea months ago? Her mind was rattling with all the scenarios and could-bes and she found herself lost. Cersei wanted to scream that her plan had only gone halfway through, but she had to compose herself because Robert had bust through the doors of the room bearing a smile she had never seen him wear before. Around his growing waist was deer pelt and then there was another over his broad shoulder. Yes, she remembered he left her to go hunting even though she warned that the children might come any day now. That thought alone served to infuriate her all over again. Twins. He sounded excited, and she knew why. Double Baratheons, he was thinking. Oh, what a joy to be had. Only one Baratheon for you, my dear husband. And it is the one you can keep. I don't care. She only said in her mind. This girl was his, but the boy was hers and Jaime's. Twins, my love. The smile on her face nearly cracked as he walked himself over, placing a chaste kiss on her forehead much to her surprise. Her eyes widened for a split second but then pushed the thought aside that he was happy she done her job as a breeder. That was all she was to him, his queen, and his breeder. Oh, he has your Lannister look. He said about the boy, and that made her lips curl up in a true smile. Because he's mine. He is mine and Jaime's, the only man I love has given this blessing to me. As soon as Robert's thumb caressed the baby's soft cheek, he opened his eyes. Circe gasped as to her horror that this child she thought was hers and Jaime's had the Baratheon bluest of eyes. No. No, that can't be. She screamed inwardly in horror. Robert's face lit up exactly at that, and he took the boy from her despite how much she wanted to snatch him back. He has my father and mine eyes. That made him happy, overjoyed at most. Circe bit down on her tongue, glancing down at the daughter in her arms. She had opened her eyes too, and Circe saw the beautiful shade of green. Her heart had grown soft and she found all the hatred that spurned for this child web itself away. "Oh, my girl, she is so beautiful," the queen whispered as she brought her lips to baby's forehead. "Stefan and Cassandra, their names shall be. I want to name them after my parents." She wanted to say she hated it, despised it even. Yet, what could she do? They were his. And mine too. Her verdant-colored eyes looked up at her husband, who looked at her almost to wait to see if she would approve. "Yes, my love. Stefan and Cassandra are lovely and will do." Cassandra. Any other day, it would feel like a normal day in King's Landing. It wasn't though. Today was much more special. It was the name day she shared with her twin. Normally, a girl would be excited about her 17th year of life. And what other way to celebrate it? With a huge party, of course. Cassandra loved parties. It always brought some sort of energy through her that made her feel much more alive than usual. She enjoyed being surrounded by people, dancing to jovial music, and eating foods her mother would never allow her to even touch or smell any regular day of the year. Her mother was so strict with her diet, telling her what meals she could and couldn't have. Most of the time, she would simply whisper in her ear that she'd grow rotund like a boar like their father with her eating habits. Despite it all, today, however, she would eat all the cakes and other pastries she wanted and watch her mother count how many she consumed until she would say that's enough. Stefan, on the other hand, was never quite that fond of parties. He was great at keeping and starting conversations, charismatic of the sorts, but his demise was his two left feet. He couldn't dance or have the voice to carry a nice tune. He oft forgot lyrics, simple ones and all. He could probably, and without fail, recite a whole scenario of the reigns of Castamere and yet could not tell you the first line of The Bear and the Fair Maiden. Their father would rather it be that way. He found himself proud and gloating seeing how Stefan was strong or how swift and true he could handle a blade. One day, he would inherit their father's warhammer like he always dreamed. It was accomplishments like that always left her feeling empty. Cassandra couldn't make her father proud in ways like that. While Stefan had the sword, she had a sewing needle. She had pretty dresses, and he had shiny armor. All he would say was how beautiful she was and how she truly reminded him of her grandmother Cassandra. Beauty was all she had while Stefan had courage, strength, and camaraderie to his belt. It hadn't stopped her from picking up a sword and practicing with her brother during the nights when the moon would play the role of the sun. She wore gloves but the callus would show eventually with the more she done it, no matter how much oil she rubbed on her hands. If her father knew she was behaving anything like her base-born sister, Maya, then he was sure to be enraged. Even though he said to love her, he said that Maya was Maya and she was Cassandra. Cassandra was a princess, born of true and noble birth of House Baratheon and House Lannister. It all meant that she had to have the grace and essence of nobling from the top of her head and to the tip of her toes. It was such a harsh thing, and it made her feel guilty to lie and sneak, but if she were to have any sort of freedom or anything to claim her own then that was all she could do. Thank the gods that Stefan loved her enough to never tell as well as encourage it. If their little brother Joffrey knew, by the breath of the seven, he surely would have outed her. He liked winning favors by tattling or lying, he was just that conniving. She still loved him though, hot-tempered and all. Cassie. Her eyes slowly looked up to gaze at her mother. A smile, possibly strained in sight, had spread across her lips. It always worried her whenever her mother came suddenly, not alerting her handmaidens of her arrival. Her hands pressed down her dress to smooth it down, making sure it wasn't wrinkled or messy. To finish, she combed back her wavy locks with a quick comb of her fingers. It only made her mother smile, chuckle even. "I am your mother," she said, "you need not look so prim and proper in your bedchamber for me. I encourage it though, especially for today. Feeling silly, she began to twiddle her thumbs with a lopsided grin on her face now. Sorry. She was always awkward with propriety, and sometimes forgot a lot of the rules. Her septa nearly had headache from just looking at her alone half the time. No need to be, little fawn. That eased her, if only for a little while. You're hardly so little now, a woman grown. You know what that means, don't you? With a deep intake of breath, the princess tried to summon some sort of genuine happiness. She knew exactly what her mother meant, and it made her utterly sad. It means I have to prepare to be a proper bride. Her answer was said dryly, and she tried to look more enthusiastic than she felt. It took everything in her to not roll her eyes and crossed her arms to show her entire dislike about it all. Circea placed her hand on the side of her daughter's head to comfort her. I know it frightens you, but that is your duty as a princess and as a woman. Women are meant to be wives and mothers. If a woman goes on and doesn't fulfill her duty, then she is considered worthless. She has no respect, and claimed to have no dignity. An old maid is not a woman worth mentioning. Her bottom lip was chewed between her teeth as Cassandra gave a rather slow nod. She very well understood, but the reality was far from welcoming. Is that why Maya wanted to marry so badly? Did she fear that she would become an old maid? Was being an old maid really such a crime? I understand, mother. She truly didn't, but she had to act like she did. Father hasn't chosen yet. Did you? I was thinking about one of our cousins. Lancel, he would be a good choice, wouldn't he? Her eyes rolled at that and she sucked her teeth. There was no way she could hide her disdain of him out of all people. Lancel. The bunghole, she thought. He was the boy who got so antsy when she flicked his forehead once at a party. He was such a pompous jerk, totally different than the cowardly, bumbling fool he behaved like in front of her father. It must have been because her father was the king and he was his squire, but shouldn't being in the princess' good favor be as equally important? Glancing at her mother, who rose a curious brow, Cassandra found herself trying to force a smile that ended up becoming a cringe. I honestly don't much care for him, mother. That doesn't matter, whether you like your husband or not, Cassie. What matters is that we keep the Lannister lineage. Most of all, should something happen to your brothers, the man you marry will be the one on the throne. Never could she see that happening, so she merely shrugged it off. Joffrey and Tommen was just as protected as Stefan was. Stefan could easily take down anyone who came in between him and his birthright. Usurper heir or not, the Iron Throne belonged to no one other than him. You think Lancel would make a good king? He can barely make a good squire. He has no wits and hardly the skill to make sound decisions regarding anything. Perhaps you're right. Her chuckle had a sweetness to it, which made Cassandra calm. Her mother was still happy, of that she clearly knew. Cassandra hated when her mother was unhappy. It was like fresh hell when she was on a warpath. Who do you think would make a good husband? A good king should the responsibility befall him. Well. She had no idea. Her mind was blank. At her mother's fixated gaze, she found her face starting to heat up and her mind becoming more and more muddled. It was probably sad. She had no clear image of her future and didn't even take the time to work on it. Most girls would be hoping for a good proper husband, and she hardly met any man that she knew by name that weren't too old or already married. Never in her life did she want a marriage like Lysa and Jon Arryn. One thought did come to mind, and it made her pipe up just a bit. Her eyes were alight with a little sense of pride. How about one of the Tyrells? Surely, we'd have something to gain marrying them, wouldn't we? They have a great source of... Her sentence fell short by the sight of her mother's face. The small smile that managed to stay on her mother's face before quickly withered away. Of course, her mother didn't like the Tyrells. Does she like anyone? Cassandra couldn't help but ponder. Anyone that isn't us, I mean. I suppose. Was her mother's sweet way of saying no. The crippled or the knight? Surely the knight, right? I hear Sir Loras is quite handsome and knows how to wield a lance better than most boys his age. Is he smart? Does he know how to rule? That, my dear, is what we should find out. Hardly interested in marriage or Sir Loras, she tried to suppress a yawn. She gave a rather absent nod instead to at least pretend she was considering it. Does that mean you're going to send spies, Mother? It seemed likely. She would want to know everything that there is to know about him before pushing the idea of marriage forward. If not the Tyrells, what of the Starks? Ned Stark is father's best friend and the Starks are known to be honorable. No. The answer was swift and said with no room for argument. Do you think I'd send my sweet girl to the cold, northern country with a bunch of direwolves who starve themselves on fraudulent honor? Ned Stark claims himself honorable, but he bed a whore and brought his bastard back into their home. Your king father had enough sense not to do that. All men make mistakes, but that kind of mistake did break before it hardied a woman's heart. She couldn't imagine how it must have felt for Ned Stark's wife to deal with a child he made within their marriage be brought to their home. It must have hurt. Every day she looked at that child with her husband's features growing and growing more prominent as time went on. Unless she was like her mother, who pettily threatened her king father whenever one of the baseborn were even mentioned. If it weren't for her and Stefan arguing about wanting to know Maya and Edric, they probably would have never had the chance to meet them. That has nothing to do with his son, Mother. She wanted to say that. She wanted to tell her mother those words exactly, but she knew an argument would ensue. So like the perfect daughter, the dutiful princess, Cassandra merely nodded her head in subservience. Cersei merely looked her over, seemingly happy with the obedient display. Whenever she could have her children in line, she seemed to be completely placated. How is Lord Arryn? Shifting the conversation entirely would give her room to breathe. If she could change the course of thoughts of marriage to something a little more dire, she could wonder if there was any hope for the Lord of the Eyrie. She loved him, like a grandfather. He had suddenly taken on a much paler appearance and has become much more thinner. Her father would say that was just her mind playing tricks on her, but Cassandra believed herself perceptive. And what of Lady Arryn? She seemed so jumpy and paranoid, and she would hide her son for days until little Robin seemed like a figment of someone's imagination. Not that Cassandra minded, the boy was foul in temper, but he was much more easy to calm when you knew the right words or could distract him with something. She wondered if her father was just remaining blissfully ignorant because he was scared or because he was really that blind. Either way, she was worried that Lord Arryn didn't have that much time left. It doesn't seem he is getting any better, I'm afraid. Cassandra knew better than to think her mother cared. She didn't really like Lord Arryn much, she would call him nosy and fairly guileless when it concerned her father. Lord Arryn did very much turn the other cheek to her father's wrongs, but it was because he cared for him. And Cassandra could admit that she and her twin often did the same when it came to him. I want to see him. Her voice was whisper-like, low, almost afraid if her mother heard it then she would quickly refuse. Her heart ached at the idea that he was going to die. She knew he was. It was only a matter of time. The soft sounds of heeled boots touching the marble floor had alerted her that her mother was drawing closer. One hand rested on her left shoulder while another rested on her right. Golden hair had swung where her eyes could see as her mother lowered her head to search for her eyes. My sweet girl, he is quite old and has already lived for so very long. You did not think he had much time, did you? Lord Walder Free has lived longer than anyone has ever expected him to. Her statement was spoken rather matter-of-factly, so why not think someone else would be just as lucky? Cersei laughed at that, rather bitterly. He should have died years ago. What the gods have in mind keeping him alive as well as spill that disgusting seed of his all over the place is beyond my comprehension. Her thumbs pressed against her shoulders, drawing small circles in efforts to comfort. But Lord Arryn is not Walder Free. If only the good lived as long as the bad, then the world might be just as sweet as you. The truth felt rather dark and left her feeling uncomfortable. There was a saying that the good died young, but Lord Arryn was hardly close to his years of youth. Her mother was right that he had indeed lived a long life, and maybe the seven thought it time that he rest and give him to the stranger. But if you want to see him and say what is on your mind, for it might be the last. Removing her hands from her shoulders, Cersei began to walk towards the only exit of her bedchambers. Then I allow it. Be strong, my girl. Death is inevitable and everyone has a day where it comes to claim them. Her mother's words echoed in her head like a lyric that one couldn't forget. It was stuck and it made her skin prickle with goose pimples. Death seemed like such a non-existent thing until you realized that it waited in every corner of your life, slowly inching towards you and then engulfing the people you love dearly. Death wasn't kind to everyone and nor was it patient. You could not tell it you weren't ready with a weak heart. You would think a princess never thought of death when she's so sheltered and easily kept safe with her guards all around. Sadly, Cassandra knew that death had no favorites and it came for princesses too. With a deep inhale, she folded her hands together and pressed them against her chest. Maybe a prayer at the September that Lord Arryn would get a peaceful death. Something nice like in his sleep, so that he wouldn't suffer anymore. Her father would be happy to know she wished that mercy on Lord Arryn, wouldn't he? Yet, telling him that's what she wished for would only upset him. It was her and Stefan's name-a-day, so why destroy it with such a depressing thing as that? Suddenly, her name-a-day didn't have much light about it anymore. Everything was becoming a little too surreal, marriage and losing Lord Arryn. How much more could things possibly change? Stefan. The summer sun was beating down on his back and there were beads of sweat raining down like streams from his forehead. His long, blonde hair was sticking close to the sides of his face and even the back of his neck. Yet he did not feel the slightest bit of fatigue as he held his double-edged, longsword in his hand. Blacktail was its name and it was a beauty made of Valyrian steel that was a shade away from obsidian in color. He received the sword when he was 7 since at the age of 3, Stefan had shown prodigal levels of sword fighting. His mother was against him using live steel, but his father always encouraged it. Maybe that's why Joffrey thought he was well equipped for it too, despite being much younger and less naturally skilled. Hold your sword a little higher, Joffrey. Using the sharp end of Blacktail, he pushed his little brother's sword just a bit higher in the position it should be. Right there and keep it there. Now what? He met his brother's bright green orbs, who was eagerly awaiting for the next bit of advice. He was always so impatient that Stefan hardly had the mind to even want to give him any lessons. Their mother would just force him anyway, and Stefan tended to do what his mother wanted. Half of the time. Now I want you to listen on how I tell you to keep your grip on the handle, hear me? Rolling his eyes, Joffrey nodded in reply. Don't let the grip be too tight or that's just stupid. Not even a minute to spare and Joffrey was already telling him what and wasn't right. If I keep loose then. If you would just listen to me then you'll understand what I'm saying. With his swelling anger, the beaming sun with the sweltering humidity native to King's Landing all together, did not create a great combination. Be nicer to Joffrey, Stefan. He looks up to you. Cersei's voice was so clear in his head and made him swallow the little bit of pride that was trying to surface. As much as his brother irked him, the least he could do would make it all easier. Maybe if he threw in a compliment. A lie most likely, for Joffrey did like being complimented every second of the day. Your cross parry, my brother, was nearly perfect. If you just had a right grip on your sword, you would have completely mastered it. The way Joffrey's eyes lit up at that with a slow smile creeping on his face meant that was the best decision. Of course. Could you expect any less from me? A prince. It was easy, I truly think it was good as it was, but if you say it can be better, then perhaps I'll try at it again. Wrinkling his nose, he nodded his head rather compliantly. How does a person lie like it's nothing? Just having a straight face was nearly making the muscles in his face sore. No, my dear brother, you are a sword master in the making. You might just excel at it all in such a young age. Filling his head with mindless drabble of praises was certainly working and he could see the will of listening coming back from the smirk and the look in his brother's eyes. Now he should be good for another hour at this rate. As I was saying, you must make sure your grip is not too tight. You have to find the balance between loose and tight. If your grip is steely then you're more likely to get yourself knocked down. If it be too loose then someone could knock the sword right out of your hand, you hear? With a nod, he was sure that his brother understood what he meant. Hopefully he did, or this next part would be brother aggravating and satisfying all at once. Now, come at me. It didn't take the boy twice to follow up with that. The younger prince thrust the sword upward and did not pay any heed to Stefan's advice. The older prince nearly sighed as he merely flicked his sword, letting the flat side of the blade knock the sword right out of Joffrey's hand and letting it fall on top of the grass. You didn't listen. His eyes narrowed. I told you what to do with your grip. I did. His brother shouted, picking up his sword with a deep frown. You lied to me. You just wanted to knock it out of my hand. And what reason would I have to do that? That would be a waste of my time and yours. It wasn't out of the norm for them to argue, but Stefan did expect a little peace between brothers on his own name day. If only he had stayed in bed and had another round with his sister's pretty handmaiden, then he wouldn't have had to worry about anything. He sheathed his sword with haste and then crossed his arms over his chest as his brother stomped away, muttering what he figured to be insults and possibly threats. His eyes espied much more better company, his twin. The smile on his face came naturally as she made her way over, lifting the skirts of her green dress, which could surely hide the grass stains if that's what she feared. Her green eyes caught their stomping little brother, who roughly brushed against her shoulder as he walked without even looking at her. She paused at that, turning to look over his shoulder as he made his way back to the Red Keep. With her brows knitted together, she slowly turned to face him and he answered her silent and obvious question with a half smile and shrug. Cassandra knew well enough that he and Joffrey always seemed to butt heads over one matter or the other. They were both stags, and stags locked horns quite so often. I take it practice went well, home. If it weren't for the giggle, he might have thought she seriously believed that. Shaking his head, he briefly closed his eyes as he said his sarcastic remark. It went really well, dear sister. So well that I might just be having a happy headache. Oh, I never heard of that. Standing next to him, she had leaned against the weapon rack and tilted her head back. Her eyes took interest in the blue hue that was sky above them. 7 and 10, huh? And I still feel like we're still 6 and 10. Not much has changed. At least not yet. What did you think was going to happen? Stefan couldn't help but smile as he asked, for the sun to disappear. That sounds lovely right about now. Her sigh gave away her sadness, and he turned his head to catch sight her drooping shoulders. What's wrong, Cassandra? Normally, she was the more optimistic and happier one between the two. It was easy for her to smile through each and everything. He always looked for his sister for a little sun on a rainy day, but now it was his turn to be the sun after the storm. What bothers you? As she always did when troubled, she raked her fingers through her hair before grabbing a whole handful of it with a loose fist. Mother talked about marriage today. Oh. Stefan knew her sister had been dreading being married off to some stranger they never knew. He tried not to think of it either since he never been away from her for more than a couple of days. They were inseparable really and hardly knew how the other could cope without sight of each other. How does two beings that once slept in the same bed until they were 5 learn to live every day of their lives without seeing each other whenever they wanted? You just didn't separate twins. It was like cutting a whole person in half and telling them to live so painfully like that. Cassandra was more than his sister, she was another part of him. Do you have any solid suitors? No, fortunately. That lifted her spirits some, had her smiling if only just a little. She suggested Lancel at first, and I told her there was just no way I could marry him. Ah. Lancel Lannister, their cousin. His blue eyes were hooded, glittering dangerously with several thoughts. If their cousin thought he ever had the chance to lay even one finger on his sister, Stefan would end him whether their mother or grandfather or great-uncle liked it or not. Lancel couldn't handle Cassandra and nor could he be patient and understanding with her adventurous or stubborn nature. The two would fight, constantly, and Stefan believed she deserved better than a unhappy marriage with a prick like that. It was a good thing you rejected him or else I'd fear the boy would die a mysterious death. Your fault or mine? The princess grinned, making him snort. A little bit of both, if you don't mind. I'm sure we'd make a good team even if it means teaming up to murder someone. The sound of her laugh eased him a little, making him glad to know that he could lighten the mood somewhat. Though I wager neither one of us want to be known as a kinslayers. True. They both nodded in agreement at that. Oh, I also suggested a Tyrell, but Mother wasn't happy about that either. She called Lord Willer's Tyrell a cripple, but she was more so open about Laura's. His eyes glanced at his sister from their corners as she blinked her big eyes innocently. She doesn't know. He thought, and he wondered if he should tell her. It was only rumors, but these rumors were becoming increasingly spoken of a little too often. Not just that, he had seen it with own eyes once at how strangely close their Uncle Renly and Sir Loras was. It could have been him reading for something that wasn't there, but it didn't seem that much of a stretch. Are you interested in marrying him? First, he would get her opinion on it. That was safer than to just assume she wanted to be forever bound to Laura's Tyrell. No, I'm not interested at all, but it is certainly better than the odds of marrying Lancel. He could only nod at that. Because Laura's wouldn't even touch you. For his sister to be married to a man that only lie with other men. He imagined how saddening it would become. She'd be happy at the freedom at first, but if she should ever feel the need to have children, she'd be doomed to only make bastards if she were that desperate. Who else? Did you think of anyone else? Moving past Laura's, he didn't want for her to convince herself that it was safe to pick him. Wrinkling her nose, she pouted her lips in the corner. Robb Stark. The look on his face was of intrigue, and he found himself wondering why father hadn't arranged for that in the first place. Ned Stark was infamously known to be a great friend of their father and honorable and a very capable warden of the North. You would have thought they would have promised their eldest children to one another, except for the fact the two hadn't spoken to each other in several years. Stefan didn't know why exactly, but it had been about their differences of what transpired during the rebellion. He's a good match. Although there was not a thing he knew about the Stark heir, he did hear good things enough. He was smart, kind, and many girls would call him handsome. He had a rather good reputation. Surely better than Lancel and Laura's put together. An inelegant snort escaped his sister, making him raise a curious brow. Mother would rather kill me now than give me to a Stark. I don't know what's her problem with them, but she was not happy when I mentioned him. Their mother didn't like anyone. If they weren't a Lannister, then they were an enemy. He could recall hearing his mother tell him when he was younger that anyone that isn't them is an enemy. It sounded like such a paranoid, crazy thing to say, and he often tried to forget he ever remembered her telling him that. It always did leave him questioning though why his mother felt so protective. Did she have a secret? Was she afraid of said secret being found out? Cassandra interrupted his train of thought as she crossed her arms. I have a feeling that mother doesn't like anyone and she'll just want me to marry of our own blood. She keeps talking about keeping the Lannister lineage. Her green eyes met his blues. She might marry you to one of our cousins too. By the old gods, I'd rather die than marry any of them. The prince never liked when a family stayed within their bloodline. It made it much harder for you to escape your family, and Stefan most certainly wanted to escape a whole lot of the Lannisters. Many of them were too pretentious, and hardly did he have anything in common with them except their shared blonde hair and their blood ties. In some ways, he envied his sister for looking much more Baratheon than he did. I am a little curious of Robb Stark though. That surprised him. Cassandra never seemed to be happy when the talks of marriage were hinted, but now she took her interest in a Stark. And why is that? A smirk on his face grew, a little happy to see his sister a little happy about something. She shrugged her small shoulders. Well, mother hates the Starks, and you know I like doing things she hates. The air became filled with his laughter as she chuckled along with him, and because he is a Stark. Everyone speaks so highly of them, and father goes on and on about how great Lord Stark is. So I'm curious, but that doesn't mean I want to marry him. I hardly know him. Stefan found her reasoning sound and enough, so why not tell father? That would infuriate mother much more. Oh yes, she'll turn so red in the face. Wrapping her arms in the middle, her eyes crinkled as she gave out a hearty laugh as the image came to mind. She'd get her revenge somehow though. Mother's vengeance always come back to bite you in some way. Speaking of which, that also means you need to stop sleeping with, oh, I don't know, my handmaiden. All the lightness of the atmosphere around them immediately dropped, and his laughing face turned into one of stone. Crossing his arms, he sucked his teeth. Why should he give up Jocelyn? Jocelyn was a good distraction, a girl that was his friend and his comfort during the stressful times. Stefan could admit that there was no love between them though. He didn't love anyone that wasn't a sword or family for several reasons. There's just fun between Jocelyn and I. Fun that could lead into her getting harmed, Stefan. The way she stressed it showed just how severe the situation was. She gave him no smile, just a hardened stare and a serious frown. Mother will think that Jocelyn will try to get herself with child, and you know how mother feels about bastards. She'll hurt Jocelyn, and I don't want anything to happen to her or you. You'd think it all fun and games now until it all goes uncontrollably left. She drinks her moon tea, sister. I know because she shows me. He was sure that Jocelyn didn't want a child just as much as he didn't. Let me have my fun until I'm forced to marry a woman I've never even seen before. Father told me is looking to fix our ties with Dawn, which means I might have to marry Princess Ariane Martel. She's a bit older, but I hear Dawnish women are beautiful and exciting, in and out of bed. That's disgusting. We're twins and all, but I don't want to hear about you fucking around with women. Mushing his face away playfully while pushing herself off the weapons rack, Cassandra smoothed the creases of her gun. You're so reckless, you know that. There's too many people waiting for you to fall dead and screw up, and you act as if you don't even care. I worry for you, Stefan. I really, really do. It did hurt to hear how concerned his sister was for him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder and brought her close, laying his head atop of hers. My sweet, sweet Cassie. What would I do without such a doting sister? I'd fear I'd be even more reckless and foolish. He teased, making her elbow his side. She pouted as he laughed and began to stomp away, heading in the direction that he knew she would go. She would be heading off to see Jonarin before the party started. Stefan let out a sigh, knowing very well he wanted to see the dying Lord of the Uri too. Glancing back at Blacktail, he wondered if what Cassandra said was true. Were there people really waiting for him to die? Is that why his father stressed to have taste testers before he even ate his dinner or take a sip of his wine? Is that why his father wanted to hurry him to have a bride? Surely Stefan could fight all the odds against him, big or small. The Iron Throne was meant to be his, and he would have it through blood and sweat like his father did if he couldn't have it by right. She worries too much, he said aloud to himself, nudging away the small whispers of doubt that swam through his mind. Cassandra always was a little paranoid and protective of him, even though he well adept to take care of himself. Circia. Since she was a girl, Circia had never been much too fond of parties. The whole act of it always left her tired and dreadfully bored. Well, maybe that had been a lie. Circia did like parties until she knew the meaning of them as she grew older. It became less and less about fun and more about which lord wanted to marry their child to and what lord wanted to lay with a certain woman for whatever reason. It became less about the celebration and more what was to be gained. Since then, parties didn't mean anything to her except a headache and a time she must fix her face into a pleasant one, for an opportunity was fresh for the picking. In the center of the great hall, her daughter was dancing as she always did. Cassandra had a way to command all eyes on her when she danced. She was naturally gifted at what Circia believed to be a rather useless skill. Her feet moved like her body was an extension of the music and that the bard was singing just for her. Her eyes would hold a bursting color of life as her smile completely lit up the room, brighter than the torches on the wall and the candles in the chandelier. She was happy for her though. It was the 17th year since she first inhaled the air of life, and she was spending it with a smile on her face. The least her own mother could do was be happy, and Circia promised to try to be just a fraction of it. Her eyes then roamed to look for her king husband, not out of want but out of need. She needed to see what he was up to, and she suspected it was the usual. Her verdant eyes caught Robert surprisingly at her side, teeth sinking into some roasted ham. His eyes were fixated on their daughter though, and she could see that he was happy about her happiness. She's grown so much. Although his mouth was disgustingly full, Circia could bother to ignore that fact for the conversation at hand. Robert hardly had any matters because he didn't care how anyone saw him. He was the king, he would say, and he could as damned well pleased. Yes, she has. Stefan too. Her eyes then searched for her son, who was dancing with her uncle Kevan's daughter, Janie. She was a few years younger than her twin children, but she was certainly becoming a beautiful young woman. Her hair of honey blonde was of medium length and braided finely sweet side braids. It wasn't too long, just about at the middle of her back, and her eyes were big, round, and a leaf shade of green. Her face was also round, still holding her baby fat, but she was still beautiful. Circia could only imagine the beauties made if she and Stefan were married. Perhaps Joffrey would have been better suited for her due to their ages. Stefan has been a man since the age of 3. Her eyes rolled at that, the taste on her tongue quite bitter. I can hardly remember him ever behaving like a boy. I suppose you don't, since you placed so many expectations upon him since birth. Taking a sip of her wine to wash away the bitterness she tasted, Circe closed her eyes as she felt the sweet burn hit the back of her throat and down. Stefan rarely had the time to do anything a boy should have. And he turned out just fine and responsible. Of course Robert didn't see any wrong in it. A child should be a child regardless. She thought, and she wished she had been a bit more pushy when it came to Stefan. It was too late, 17 years had gone, but she could still protect Cassandra. Responsible, yes. That was mostly true. Stefan was responsible and tended to do the right thing, more than she could say about anyone in this family, including herself. He was a bit sloppy when it came to his own desires, like the sleeping with his sister handmaiden from time to time. He thought she didn't know anything about it, but Circe knew. She only pretended that she didn't because she thought it would eventually stop. Now that she was aware that Stefan couldn't keep his hands off the little whore, she would do something about it so that there weren't any accidents. If only he satiated his needs with a whore from a brothel. It would have made it all a little easier. Robert wiped his greasy hands with a napkin while she hardly touched the food on her plate. All her appetite was nearly non-existent. All she kept thinking was how grown her children had become, and how her daughter would leave her any day now. She would have to wed and move with her husband's family. If only she liked Lancel better, then she could stay close to hearth. Have you thought of who Stefan will be marrying? Curious, she placed down her cup of wine as she waited for his answer. I was hoping to make things right with those Dornish. I doubt they've ever gotten over their fucking Targaryens and what happened to Elia and her children. Her eyes narrowed at what he was alluding to and her mouth became a tight, thin line. The Martell girl, she might be able to fix that. The girl is 7 years his senior. It took everything in her to keep her voice low, to make sure she didn't attract unwanted attention. She's too old for him. I also hear she has rather whorish ways. My son will marry a maid, not some woman that's been spreading her legs all over Dorne. The frown on his face told her that he didn't like what she said, but she did not care. Circe was looking for the best interest of her boy, her oldest boy. Does it matter? She doesn't have bastards and she's a princess. Who fucking cares who she fucked or when she did? It does matter, Robert. It matters to me. The Lannister queen made it clear, her eyes burning strong with her anger. She promised herself to not argue with him during her children's party, but it was Robert. They argued like it was all they could do around each other. It was their only way of communicating. Fine, forget the Martell girl. Who do you think would be a better suited wife? A future queen. Looking back over to Stefan, surrounded by empty-headed girls with hearts in their eyes, she tried to think who would be best to stand beside him. No one had come to mind. Her son was just too good for any woman in this entire kingdom. If things had been right, he would have been the son of Rhaegar. Yes, he truly would have been a beautiful prince of dragon and lion's blood, better than the stag half of him. Even without that dragon's blood, he was much too good for anyone because he was her son. All her children were better than anyone on this 7 green earth. Tilting her head in thought, her eyes kept their fixated gaze as Stefan mouthed words she couldn't quite hear or make out. From the looks of it, he was giving compliments to the lot of those girls because their eyes became moist and their lips perked upward at their corners. A huge flirt he was, almost if not more than charming as his Uncle Jaime. He knew what a woman wanted to hear. Well, Jaime only knew what she wanted to hear. I'll think about it. She cut the conversation there for now since she was too interested at the fact that Lancel was asking for Cassandra's hand for a dance. Circe smiled at this, for she whispered some words into the boy's ear earlier to get on her daughter's good side. Cassandra clearly hated him, she knew that much from this morning, but relationships were easy to mend. She could sway Cassandra, for she was still quite a bit guileless when it came to men. Circe was only sure that Lancel was mean to her because he liked her. Men thought that was cute sometimes. Because she was so courteous, Cassandra accepted it, but the frown on her face was desperately fighting to be shown. Her little girl twirled, making her skirts rise just a little above her ankles and show her heeled shoes. She should thank the Septa for making Cassandra so good with music. It seemed all the teaching paid off greatly because there were many other men in line to dance with her. Most men loved a true lady, and they certainly loved the prancing little fawn that was her daughter. Smirking with pride, she took another swig of the good, red wine. Robert stood, halfway drunk, and raised his gold goblet high in the air. "Attention!" he shouted, his voice booming and bouncing off the walls of the large room. He was so loud that he didn't need to command their attention for a second time. The music instantly stopped and all chatter became quiet. Everything was silent as the dead for Robert. "I'd like to make a toast to my twins. My pride and joys." His cheeks were red and his smile made his face seem even redder. Stefan and Cassandra were given cups of wine and found their way to each other, standing right at the center of the floor as they faced their father. They looked so different, hardly like they were twins, but the shape of their noses and right around the eyes did they look completely resemble each other. Their dramatic contrasts of hair really made them individuals unlike her and Jamie. "My gift to my son, Stefan, is what I've been waiting to give him for so many years." Raising his free hand, his fat fingers pointed to a servant at the far left that had something in their arms. It was cloaked so that nobody could see it, and Circe found herself wondering just what it was. The servant ambled his way over to Stefan, standing right before him now. Stefan looked excited but tried to hold it in with a pinched face. As soon as the man lifted the cloak that laid atop of what was in his arms, Stefan's face immediately unloosened and broke out into a smile. "I should have known," she thought, a exasperated sigh escaping her as it was a warhammer. It was Robert's warhammer, the one he killed Rhaegar Targaryen with at the Ruby Ford. It seemed to have been greatly fixed and looked entirely new, and Stefan looked as if he could shed a tear at how happy he was to receive it. Circe supposed she should be happy for him, but her eyes couldn't help to look to see Joffrey's blatant anger. Her precious golden boy was furious and there was nothing she could do to cool his temper. Joffrey always loathed at being second best to his brother, but what could be done if he was the younger? "Father. I don't know what to say," her eldest boy stammered, picking up the warhammer with a bit of struggle but trying to summon the strength so that he didn't drop it. "Thank me, boy. Do you know how hard it is to part with that thing? I loved that thing like I love my own life." A few laughs erupted, and Stefan was grinning so hard. "But it belongs with you now. I have no need for it anymore. You're my heir, my son, my shining boy. This warhammer belongs with you, Stefan." Cassandra used her petite fingers to wipe away the one tear that rolled down her twin's face. Such a good daughter and an even good sister she was, Circe thought. "Thank you, father. I feel so happy and blessed to be given this. I won't let you down, not now or ever." "That's what I like to hear." There was an applause, smiling faces and envious eyes. That's how it always was in the sea around royalty. Circe clapped with effort for her boy, and she could say that she was a little proud of Robert for being so good to their son. "And to my daughter, I'd never forget you, my little girl." The way she suddenly straightened, eyes big with surprise, made Circe smile. She was a little awkward at times, but that was made her unique. A servant from the right side of the great hall made his way over, almost like the first with something cloaked over the gift. Circe rose a brow, wondering just what Robert knew to give a girl. It didn't take long before she figured it all out. Laying atop of red, plush pillow was a circlet. From the looks of it, it was made of pure gold and was designed almost like a laurel. In the center was a marigold-designed flower with a jade gem in the middle. It was beautiful and she could see how entranced Cassandra was by the sight of it. Robert left the high table they sat at and made his way over to her, a bit sluggishly from how drunk he was. Once he stood before her with the servant out of the way, he smoothed down her dark hair with care before picked up the circlet and placed it on her head with steady hands. Cassandra truly looked beautiful and the jade in the center truly brought out the green of her eyes. Circe was happy that Robert went as grand for her as he did their son. Cassandra's eyes were now cooling with tears, but they were crinkling from the shy giggles that kept leaving her lips. "You've grown to be so beautiful, but I suppose I'd have to thank your grandmother for that." Trying her best not to snort, she proceeded to smile since there were eyes on her. "More and more of each day you look just like her and your mother when I first met her too." A much more innocent her that believed she was going to love her husband and proud to be queen. Circe hoped that Cassandra was never as foolish as she was when she first laid eyes on Robert with her husband-to-be. That's why I gave you this, since it was once my mother's. She would have been so happy to have met you, Cassandra. You're such a good child with a big heart. Like a good father, he kissed the top of her head, right in her mane of black hair like his own. Just like she did as a girl, she jumped up and wrapped her lanky arms around his neck and held him close. Thank you so much, father. I will cherish this gift forever. If there was one thing Circe could say about her husband, it was that he was indeed a good father. He loved their children, all of them. He then came back towards the high table and sat next to her, face still holding his smile. Cassandra and Stefan turned to each other, speaking happily about their gifts. I would like to give my gifts. Her mood completely darkened as her eyes shifted towards the imp. He got himself out of his seat and waddled his way over with his short and stumpy legs. With a sneer, she watched with sharp eyes as he stood before her children. I've gotten you 2 presents I'm sure you'll both enjoy. Cassandra parted her lips, about to say something, but Tyrion stopped her by raising a finger. And before you ask, no, it is not a book. She chuckled at that, making Circe believe that her daughter was truly going to ask that. Her brother always liked to read and thought everyone enjoyed the boring activities he did. Like they weren't young and wanted something they could actually use. An overpower of history long past dead would do nothing for them. With a clap of his small hands, the doors opened and 2 servants came out, but with collective gasps, Circe pushed her chair back and stood in complete horror. In the arms of those servants were cubs, Rakkar cubs, white lions that weren't even native to Westeros. Cassandra and Stefan gasped at the sight of them as the servants stood before them to hand them the beasts. Cassandra immediately grabbed one without hesitance. The animal did not harm her like Circe feared, but instead pawed gently at her chest and brought its filthy tongue to lick her face. Uncle Tyrion, this is amazing. She nearly screamed with joy, jumping in place like a little girl that was given a new doll. It was no toy, but a dangerous animal, and Cassandra was old enough to realize that. Instead, she acted as if she didn't even care about that. How could her children be so blind to realize how dangerous these animals were and how it weren't safe for them to have? Stefan handed his warhammer to a servant for him to hold and took his Rakkar cup with ease. Where did you get them, uncle? He bothered to ask, letting his hand glide against the soft fur between the cat's ears. A good friend of mine is a trader, and sometimes deals with animals from time to time. He told me he was given a litter of Rakkar, and so I thought. I haven't given my niece or nephew a proper gift yet, so why not give them pets? His head slowly turned to look at Robert. I know they are Baratheons, my king, but imagine trying to get a stag into the castle. Robert laughed as if it were a funny joke, but she was still infuriated that he dared give her children beasts that could maul to death them as they slept. They are wild animals. You could have just gotten them cats. Her voice was full of anger, and what boiled her blood more was that he could tell that this was going to be her exact reaction. I know, but they can be domesticated, sister. With good training, they can be like any other house pet. Tyrion flashed her that stupid smile she loathed before looking back at Stefan and Cassandra. You two ought be extremely responsible when it comes to them, but I have a man that knows to keep them to the heel if you two don't do what you are going to promise me right now that you're going to do. I promise, Uncle Tyrion. I'll take care of it properly. As eagerly as she said it, Cassandra brought the lion's face close to her own to nuzzle it. This had gone too far, and now there was no rejecting it, because then her children would look at her evil and hate her if she told them they couldn't have them. Tyrion would be looked at so favorably that they would never listen to her again. And Circe never wanted that. Stefan kept petting his love within every stroke he gave it. It was hard for him to visually show how much he cared for something, but he was obvious about this Rakkar. I'm not all too fond about having these dangerous animals in the castle. Robert told them sternly, but if the Targaryens could have dragons, why can't my children have lions? And that was it. The Red Keep had 2 Rakkar cubs within its walls. Cassandra. The bells kept ringing, and sometimes Cassandra thought they would never stop. Her hands rose to cover her ears, wishing it would all stop, and all that she would be able to hear was the ocean waves crashing against the shore from her window. She knew what the bells had meant, she just didn't want to believe it. Her eyes squeezed themselves closed, trying to drown out the sound that was impossible to even ignore. Her Raka crawled itself out of its little bed and made its way over towards Cassandra's bed. Using the sharp claws, it climbed itself up the blankets until it landed atop of her bed. In a trollop, it made its way to her lap and nestled right in it. Raya, she named her lion, seemed to have known how she must have felt, or that's what Cassandra liked to think. Raya kept meowing and nuzzling her face against her stomach, demanding nothing of her except closeness. Scooping Raya into her arms, the cub laid against her with its bright blue eyes staring straight at her green. Lord Arin is dead, Raya. Her voice was whisper soft, trying to keep tears from falling as she cradled the animal in her arms. I wish you could have met him. I think he would have been just a bit scared to meet you though, but he would have liked you. I think. One of the dual doors of her bedchamber creaked open, and she ended up placing Raya back in her lap. Her eyes narrowed slightly in annoyance since there was no knock, but they softened upon the sight of her brother. She looked a mess. She was still in her nightdress, her hair was unkempt, and her eyes were red from crying. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, not even her brother, but she wasn't given much a choice. As he walked over, Silver scampered at his feet in order to keep up with his long strides. Silver and Raya, what opposing names did they give their lions? It was like they were further trying to separate themselves from one another, even through their lion siblings. He named his lion Silver because it was the color of the lion's eyes, and she named her lioness Raya because of her kind nature. Despite them being twins, their thinking pattern were not exactly on the same page. He took a seat at the edge of her bed, his large hand taking her petite one and giving it a squeeze. I came to see how you were. I'm sure you know what's going on. Cassandra smiled at his caring nature, and ended up shrugging her shoulders for her reply. I suppose I'm all right. She told him, halfway not believing herself. She truly wanted to lie in bed and shed just a few more tears and get it over with. I knew it was going to happen, but so soon. Stefan nodded understandingly, giving her hand another gentle squeeze. I'm glad I spent time with him yesterday. I didn't know that would ever be the last time I saw him alive. Swallowing the sob that was trying to climb its way out of throat, she forced herself to smile. He told me a lot of things I needed to hear. Silver laid himself down at Stefan's feet, lounging while absently swinging his tail. Raya seemed to have noticed her brother's company but didn't want to leave Cassandra just yet. I know what I'm about to say sounds, well, mad. Arching a brow, Cassandra gave her brother an inquisitive stare. I have a feeling that Lord Arin didn't die, normally. She blanched, her eyes becoming wide. She quickly looked to see if the doors to her room were closed and was relieved to see they definitely were. What Stefan was implying shouldn't, or more like couldn't be heard by just anyone. That's a strong accusation, Stefan. Keeping her voice low, the Baratheon girl leaned forward just a bit to keep the conversation more strictly between the both of them. Who knows who would press their ear to do the door? And her mother had a habit of just walking in whenever she felt like it. Even Jocelyn couldn't know of this. This had to be kept between the two of them. Why would someone want to kill him? I don't know. His blonde hair shook wildly as he moved his head, obviously having doubts. It's just. Sighing, he tried to articulate his thoughts. Uncle Stannis and Lord Arin were acting rather strange for the past couple of months. They were doing a lot of walking around in the city and asking a lot of strange questions. What kind of questions? Her interest piqued. Cassandra wanted to know what led her brother to think a murder is what happened. Part of her was scared to find out because finding out meant that she was dangerously involved in what happened. If she kept it secret, she was sure it would kill her inside that if she found out he was murdered that she never told anyone, especially their father. I don't know, I just heard they were strange. Irked that he didn't know the questions exactly, she sighed and leaned away from him to rest against her pillows. Uncle Stannis is leaving today too. He won't even stay for the funeral. And I think Lady Arin left last night. Don't you see? Something strange is happening around here. Her husband just died, why would she want to run away? That is if she feared he was murdered too. Perhaps, Lady Arin knew who did it and wanted to protect herself and her son. Slipping her hand out of Stefan's hold, she combed both hands through her hair in distraught. I don't know what's going on and I don't like any of it. Cassandra didn't want to believe foul play was involved. Murder. In their own home. No, she didn't want to believe it because then she'll be scared of who the stranger will come for next. Don't be so cowardly, Cassie. Stefan lectured, that's not like you at all. Meekly, she looked up at him and then averted her gaze, almost ashamed. He was right, it wasn't like her. She was never this cowardly. Usually in the face of adversity, Cassandra would try to fight through it, but she couldn't find the will to fight anything as of late. Lord Arin's death, talks of marriage, leaving her family, and now a possible murderer in their home. How could she even think straight, let alone be brave right now? Now that he's dead, father has to get a new hand. Do you think he'll choose grandfather? He was the hand before, for the Mad King, that is. Tywine was said to be a good hand of the king, so their father would choose him, right? Her face scrunched up in confusion when Stefan shook his head. No, I think he's going to look north. A sudden realization came through her, and her whole body became rigid. I think you might be able to meet Robb Stark after all. Stefan. It was still summer, nowhere near autumn, but it felt like had winter already crept its way in. The chill of the air would bite at his face, and yet Stefan didn't feel at all bothered by it. In fact, he rather liked it. It was a fresh change away from the warm weather he always known. There was not a trace of heat in the air and not one bit of sun to make him sweat from just moving an inch or not at all. The eternal summer that stayed in King's Landing was boring to him now. He wanted to get a feel of the cold, northern lands of the country that his mother considered too harsh. He wanted to see what summer snow was like and how it felt on one's skin. What did snow even look like anyway? He just heard it was white, fell from the sky, and stuck to the ground in blankets. Stefan wanted to see it for himself for the first time. Hopefully, he'd be so lucky during their stay. It was rather childish, possibly the boy that still remained within his heart, that prayed to the old gods that he'd get the chance. Glancing down at his horse, Storm Runner, he gently stalked along the black stallion's neck in efforts to calm the animal's rising temper. Storm never liked riding slow, he was a horse that loved speed, which was why Stefan gave him Storm Runner as a name. If only he had a few foods the horse liked to stall his frustration, then he wouldn't have to worry about him speeding off and getting him to slow down. It was probably the worst decision on his part for choosing him, but he had hard time deciding to leave him back at home. Whenever the occasion called for a horse, he just had to choose the one he had since he was 10. Calm down, boy. Now isn't the time. He kept his voice low and calm. For a minute, he thought that Storm understood because he seemed to cave in. Storm instantly became less hostile and galloped comfortably. Well, that was fast. Stefan mumbled, shrugging his shoulders with acceptance. He wouldn't question it. Are you talking to yourself, Stefan? Leave it to his twin to take her boredom out on him with her teasing. He didn't mind it though, he enjoyed her play, and he shifted his attention towards her as she rose her thick eyebrow curiously. You know what they say about people that talk to themselves? That they're unfortunate to have a sister who doesn't mind her own affairs. The sudden change of her expression made him snort before busting out in full-blown laughter. He could tell she didn't expect for her joke to backfire, and now she was pouting like a child of Tommen's age. Don't worry, I like when you mind my affairs. Sometimes. Just don't be antsy when I mind yours. With a roll of her green eyes, she wrinkled her nose in annoyance. You always mind mine, my sweet brother. I hardly think there are any secrets between us because of our mutual snooping. Even though all the bones in his body became completely stiff, Stefan kept a completely straight face. He knew a great lot of things that Cassandra didn't, which would count as secrets since he kept them to himself. The only secrets he kept were to spare her feelings, not to intentionally keep them from her for no reason. The corner of his lips worked themselves upwards to make a smile. We know everything each other knows. It made him want to cringe for lying, but he kept telling himself it was for the best. That it was for her. She smiled her happy smile, making him feel much worse. Stefan liked to think he was a good person, a good brother, but what brother keeps secrets from his sister? His twin. A brother who doesn't want to see her hurt, he reasoned to himself rather weakly. A brother that loves her more than anything on this earth and doesn't want to see her cry. There was nothing more he hated in this world than to see his sister so torn up. Stefan always made it his mission to protect her with every bit of himself as long as he possibly could. Pushing the negative thoughts aside, he noticed her horse was behaving much more better than his was. It left him feeling a bit envious. Phantom was much more easier to tame and you could bribe it with rubs and apples to make him be so pleasant. She had received the horse from their uncle Stannis on her 14th name day after she cried and cried to their mother about letting her keep practicing her horse riding. He could see that their mother wished she didn't let her until this day because they argued for a whole hour before the trip began. Their mother didn't like the idea that Cassandra wanted to ride and not stay in the wheelhouse with herself, Joffrey, and the little ones. Cassandra liked to be the unconventional kind of princess that made her own rules whilst still being dutiful all the same. Cersei always hated when she couldn't control his sister and keep her dainty and meek. Cassandra too busy admired their father to even think that she couldn't do what she wanted while doing what was required. You could say it made Stefan love his sister much more because she was more than just a sister, she was his best friend. The one he could sword fight with without arguing about simple gripping. It was a shame it had to be kept secret. If his sister ever wanted to be a knight, he was sure she'd be on the path to be just as great as their uncle or Barristan Selmy if she had the luxury and been a man. Joffrey should have been riding with them if not Cassandra. As a prince, it showed a little more masculinity to be atop of a horse as if to outwardly dare for someone to come at them and for people to see their prince strong as well as proud. Their little brother wasn't exactly fond of the animals. He'd rather hunt them and do torture fun than befriend them or use them for good purpose. Joffrey could ride a horse, but he could have been perfect at it if it weren't for his cruel streak. He wouldn't be outshone by his own older sister that could perform a whole tourney with good control if allowed. It was embarrassing really, which was probably why their own father probably didn't pay much attention to him, sadly enough. Stefan could say that Joffrey was the lucky one because their father had relaxed expectations of him. It was because Stefan was the oldest, named after their paternal grandfather, and the crown prince that their father expected very, very little mistakes. If Stefan made just one, he'd see the crestfallen look and then hear a whole lecture on why he should be better. He would remind him of how this and that son was better or how men before him were better at certain things. He heard speeches like that before he learned to use a pot while Joffrey heard it less and did not have eyes constantly watching his every movement. It wasn't fair. Joffrey should have went through the same as he, but he was the second boy. So the expectations weren't that high. Steph, what's wrong? Blinking his eyes back to focus, he saw the worried look on his twin's face. He smiled at her concern before shaking his head, it's nothing. Don't worry about me. If he didn't change the subject, she would cry, and so he took a glance of their lions and decided to move her attention towards them. I see Silver and Raya aren't too fond of your idea. His eyes pointed down to the knapsack strapped to Phantom where the Rakkars stuck out their little heads to gaze out what was around them. Silver was a restless thing, and he could see the boredom and need to stretch his legs so evident on his face. They can't keep up with the horses. She huffed, obviously a little hurt that they weren't appreciative of her idea. It wasn't like they understood and Stefan knew that she had known that. Mother knows best. Calling yourself mother to the kittens now, are we? Stefan looked over to their uncle, whose horse trot a bit forward to keep up with them. He was now in between them, a half smile on his face. I'm sure they appreciate all your motherly duties. Quiet, uncle. They be kittens now but you'll cower at the sight of them full grown. Cassandra bit at him, smiling playfully. I don't doubt that. Jaime smirked as he sighed with faux fear, seeing full-grown lions in our castle's walls might have me shaking in these golden boots of mine if I hadn't met lions before. It's been such a long time since my last encounter with one though. You'll have to protect me, my dear niece. Their uncle didn't fear anything. Why should he? He was one of the best swordsmen in Westeros currently. Lions wouldn't scare him, Stefan was sure of that. Hush. Just because I didn't birth them that doesn't mean I can't be their mother. The look on their uncle's face was rather one of thought, a glaze over his eyes like a golden shield to hide his inner thoughts. It left Stefan wondering what such a look meant, but it all washed away quickly when his uncle spoke again. I still don't think it wise that Tyrion gave you lions for pets. Jaime seemed rather concerned, almost as much as their mother did. Stefan didn't really see the big deal. Many people had animals other than dogs and cats as pets. He even heard a rumor that the Starks got themselves dire wolves after their house sigil. There were still lions in Casterly Rock too. There were Lannisters before them that had lions for companions. But I see you two are happy. It makes my presents look rather poor. I enjoy your present, Uncle Jaime. Nothing could beat the Rakar's or his father's warhammer, but the golden lance he received was great. I'm certainly going to use it when we have another tourney, which I assume will be for our new hand. Their father loved arranging tourneys and he was quite frustrated when he couldn't arrange one for their birthday. Their mother convinced him not to, and with Jon Arryn's death, it didn't feel so right to celebrate. But he had one for his 16th last year and Joffrey's 13th name day was quite memorable. Stefan didn't necessarily know what Uncle Jaime had gotten Cassandra for their birthday. He hadn't asked and she hadn't outright told him. Did I tell you what Uncle Jaime gave me for my name day, Steph? Just as soon as he thought it was mentioned. Shaking the strangeness of the coincidence, he shook his head in reply. He got me a doll. A doll? Stefan repeated incredulously, why a doll? I didn't know what to get her. It was obvious he felt silly about it because he got so defensive immediately. Jaime rolled his eyes and then kept them averted, possibly out of embarrassment more than anything. She used to like when I got her them when she was little. When I was little, Uncle Jaime. She repeated dully, I'm not a little girl anymore. I'm not that child that used to pull your hair and call it straws. Stefan snorted, remembering that. She thought his hair so golden that it was akin to hay and tried to feed the horses with it. Their mother scolded her, laughing as she did, as Jaime looked into the mirror to see if she left him a bald spot in his head. I didn't know what else to give you. Cassandra reached towards their uncle, patting his hand that was holding the reins. I know. Cassandra tried to calm him sweetly, it is pretty though. I'm going to treasure it. It might be the last one you'll ever give me. Cassandra used to play with dolls until she was 9. She got bored with them as soon as she saw his sword lessons from the training yard. Their mother used to bar her from seeing such things, thinking too much violence was unbefitting before a princess' eyes, but Stefan could tell that seeing swords clashing together made her feel alive. The dolls grew dust on the shelves and Cassandra became more interested in playing with swords. Their conversation had slowly faded as he turned to look at their father, leading the cavalcade with the Kingsguard around him. Stefan sunk his heels just a bit into the horse to make it trot in order to catch up and ride alongside him. As soon as he was next to him, his father turned to look at him and immediately smiled. My boy Stefan always enjoyed hearing his father say that, it was always said with pride, and nothing felt better than to be praised by his king father. How do you feel? It's pretty chilly, ain't it? The air is just biting at you every chance it gets. You're telling me. Although he had furs draping his shoulders, large and thick, they had not completely killed the cold. It was an experience that he was enjoying though, probably much to his father's surprise. I like it though. It's different than King's Landing muggy air. His father laughed at that, nodding in agree. The north is always cold, but I always found a way to warm myself. With a drink in one hand and my cock in between a woman's legs. That's the quickest way to get yourself warm. With a snort, he didn't find himself surprised by that. Fucking and drinking. Is that the only fun that the Northerners have? Not saying that I don't like it, but I'm sure they get bored of doing just that. The Warden of the North must have plenty to do to entertain himself since he's a bit too honorable to be drunk and breeding more bastards. That was supposedly the stain on his honor, his bastard son that everyone seemed to know to be named Jon Snow. Stefan never saw the big deal, probably because he had bastard siblings of his own, some that he hadn't even known. He loved Maya and Edric and he also wanted to meet the others he didn't know. It seemed like the bigger the family was, the more Stefan wanted to know them. There weren't a lot of Baratheons like there were Lannisters and Stefan wanted to change that. If he were king, he'd give all his bastard siblings the Baratheon name so that their legend could live on. Back when Ned and I were just boys, he would tell me that they had their own tourneys, better than ours. It's more manly than fighting with those sticks in jousting. They used their swords. Their goddamn fists. It got brutal. Someone got something of theirs chopped off once in a bloody while. Now that was interesting. Stefan did like jousting, much more than his father did, but melee indeed sounded more fun. Stefan was a swordsman, and showing skill and footwork and strategy was a way to get one's name carried in the wind. He wondered if that could be arranged during their visit and how the Stark boys would fare against him. Maybe it had been the arrogance in him that thought he'd win it hands down. Stefan had never lost a fight and learned how to use a sword at such a young age. He was taught by the best swordsmen that were still alive after all. Sounds fun, I'd like to give that a go. His father nodded, like he knew that would be his reaction. Have you ever fought in their tourneys? I don't imagine a warhammer would have been accepted. No, I haven't, but damn do I want to right now. Robert laughed, a gleam in his eye showing his excitement. There was still blood that boiled for battle still in him. It was probably why he was so miserable as king, because there was not a war to be fought. It was also probably why he was so eager to find the Targaryens that remained. He loved to fight, at any cost. Before Stefan could further comment, he noted the rather sudden change in his father's expression. His eyes tried to read his face and couldn't come up with a single reason of what his father was going to say. It left him uneasy, if only just a little. I was thinking, Stefan. Keeping his eyes on his father, he watched as his king father beckoned him to ride a little bit further so that they were far away from the king's guard around them. It was an obvious motion of space for a much serious conversation. Normally they wouldn't have allowed it, but they possibly understood that this was to remain between the both of them. I was thinking of abdicating and giving you the throne. What? He didn't mean to raise his voice, he was far too shocked of what his father just admitted to him then. His eyes were as wide as round shields and his heart was beating much faster than it normally should. He swallowed thickly, blinking repeatedly in his shock as he shook his head in confusion. But why? You think I'm ready to be king? But why would you want to give it up? Why not die as king? Stefan would love to be king, he always wanted to be. He was raised to be. It was his birthright. It was his future. Why would he turn it away? But he had to know the reason why his father was deciding this. Why would he think it right while trying to get Ned Stark as his hand? Did he want to give him the throne while making Ned Stark the hand of the king as an assurance that Stefan would do right as king? Did he not trust his grandfather, Lord Tywine, to be his hand and take care of him? All of it was leaving his mind asking a million questions that he couldn't ask all at once. The king life just ain't for me, boy. I should have never decided to do it. Robert sighed, his heart seemingly heavy. After all these years, he just didn't up and want to be king anymore. Had it always been in his mind, or was he really tired of the pressures of being the ruler of Westeros? Ned would have made a better king than me, but he didn't want it. So I took it, thinking that I'd do everything that I wanted, but I am doing nothing than I want but being bored and drinking myself to an early death. I didn't even get what I've started the damn war for. Gazing away from his parent, he looked ahead at the grassy plains as he listened on. I dreamed of giving it up for many years now. I just want to take myself a ship and go to the free cities with a horse and with a hammer and just war and whore. That's me, Stefan. That's what I was made for, what I know how to do. You are my boy, the son I could ever ask for. The son I always dreamed of having. You and Cassandra are the best things I have ever made in this life of mine. You guys are my right in the choices of wrongs I made. But your brother, Joffrey. I just don't ever want to see him on the throne. That's why I need you married, having yourself some children from a good wife suited to be queen. I need Cassandra married too to ensure the future. Whatever bars that brother of yours from the throne, it need be done. But you, Stefan. You'd make a great king, better than I ever damn well was. King's Landing still needs you, father. There's a lot that still needs to be done, corrected, and I'm sure you and Ned Stark can do that if he accepts being your hand. As much as he wanted the throne, Stefan wasn't truly ready. He knew he wasn't. There was a difference between wanting the throne and being ready for it. And although he was groomed since birth, he couldn't just have it handed to him like this. I ain't giving it up right now, son. I'm going to give you the throne when I know your ass needs to be on it. As uncomfortable as that damn iron chair is. Stefan chuckled. It might have looked pleasing from another's point of view, but when his father once sat him on the throne when he was 10, he immediately wanted to get off. It was hardly comfortable and left his ass sore for a while. I promise you, father, that I'd make you proud if I am to be king. Robert smiled and reached over to him, tightly gripping his shoulder, shaking him just a bit. I know you would, boy. You've always and only done me proud. Lowering his head rather humbly, he couldn't fight the smile on his face. Those words only made his confidence grow and the future seem much more brighter. If Stefan would ever be king, he'd be the best damn king that Westeros has ever seen. And he'd do it all in the honor of his father and his grandfather. Cassandra. Her stomach felt like it was doing flips. When she heard the call that Winterfell was before them, she could feel herself wanting to steer her horse around and ride back to King's Landing. It was a silly thought and nervousness didn't have any solid reasoning. Cassandra's nerves were always racked when it came to meeting new people, she was never good with first impressions. She also wasn't settling with the idea that a match could be made between her and Robb Stark. Just the thought of meeting him was making her queasy and she wanted to hide. What if she had to marry him? What if she didn't like him? What if he didn't like her? What if he was a terrible person? Sure, the rumors suggested otherwise, but what if all that was a front? What if he was a terror like her own little brother? The wheelhouse seemed to gain speed, but she hadn't known it was because of her mother's request. Peering through the windows, she met with her mother's verdant eyes and an arched brow. Cassandra, get in the wheelhouse. They had this argument when she first decided that she wanted to ride. Her mother claimed it unprincess-like for her to be riding with all the men and her father and brother. As if Cassandra ever cared if something was princess-like or not. Mother, I don't want to be in the wheelhouse and father has allowed me to ride. Her voice was leveled, not at all disrespectful. Cersei wasn't having it though, and she could tell from how her brows knitted together so tightly and how her lips dipped into a deep, deep frown. Cassandra felt a strike of fear then, oh, how she hated when her mother gave her a look that felt like it could pierce her to death. I said for you to get in this wheelhouse. You will not come riding into the gates of Winterfell, that is not what a princess does. I accepted you riding during the journey, but I will not allow for that to be your first impression. For her mother to not care about the Starks, she sure was stressful of how smoothly things should go upon their arrival. What would they say seeing her? Would they call her unruly? Would she be considered mannish and unfeminine? Perhaps she would turn Robb Stark away and make him vehemently oppose if a marriage was spoken between them. It left her smirking subconsciously. Mother, I don't care what the Starks think. Have them think of me poorly, I am going to remain on my horse. Joffrey pulled back the curtain, his face every bit pinched. Just listen to Mother. Why do you have to make everything so difficult as well as make it about you? What kind of man would want to marry a girl like you anyways? You don't listen and you ride like a man. Sucking her teeth, she gave him an accusing glare. Normally she would have ignored him, but Cassandra was not in the mood to let his words go. She felt childish, she felt the need to argue and defend herself instead of being the bigger person. And what girl would want to marry you? A boy who is too pretty to sit his little ass on a horse and ride like a real prince. Are you a baby like Tommen? Having to sit with Mother in the royal wheelhouse, it's laughable, if you ask me. Does Mother hold your hand and rub your back when the wheels hit a rock, a real prince? Are you a baby like Tommen? Having to sit with Mother in the royal wheelhouse. Does she hold your hand and rub your back when the wheels hit a rock? Cassandra. Her mother shouted out of warning, but the damage had been done. Joffrey sneered and forced the curtain forward with such a force, shielding her from his tantrum she was sure he was going to have. Insolent witch. Oh, she heard him, and she loved as well as she loathed the reaction she got. How dare you speak to your brother like that? It was all right that he spoke to me like that. He called me a witch. She couldn't believe her mother sometimes. Joffrey could say and do what he wanted and she would just coddle him or ignore it. But her. She would be scolded and lectured on why she wasn't allowed to say or do such things and it left her blood boiling. Why must she be so proper while her brother did whatever he wanted? Out of anger, she kicked her horse into a canter to ride further away and not have to deal with them. Her mother was sure to punish her for doing this, but she hadn't cared. Her eyes stayed glued to her brother and father that were so further up in the cavalcade before looking ahead to see Winterfell's grey, high walls. Her mouth fell open in awe, eyes looking at the castle that was much older than her own. This was the place the kings of winter used to reside and the very castle that Bran the Builder had built. Cassandra was well knowledgeable about her history, forgetting a few things here and there, but she knew that much. She was well knowledgeable about the First Men and Cregan Stark as well as the myth of dragon eggs that were supposedly in the crypts of Winterfell. What if she could find one? Could she have herself a dragon? Even though it wouldn't be hers to take. Beautiful, ain't she? Her lips broke into a smile at the sound of her father's voice, and her eyes met his as he glanced back at the walls of Winterfell. Much bigger than our Red Keep and just as sturdy as the day she was made. Are you excited to meet Lord Stark again, father? The two had been infamously close, best friends, brothers. And yet they hadn't seen each other in over 9 years. Surely, her father had to be nervous, right? She would have been if she hadn't seen someone she was so close in that long. Excited? I guess you can call it that. Looking back at her father, she blinked twice in confusion, waiting for him to explain. It's been 9 years. Gods, it's like meeting someone all over again. It was rare to hear her father nervous. She wanted to comfort him but she didn't know how. Well, I'm sure he hasn't changed that much. I mean, have you changed that much for him to not recognize you? I got fat, that's for damn sure. Her brother laughed. He tried to stifle it at first, but he just couldn't fight it. His father gave him a playful, warning of a look with his eyes before laughing himself. I hope he got fat too. I can't be the only fat one. Now it was her turn to laugh. Her father always made fun of his weight, even though he could have lost it if he truly wanted to. She didn't care if her father was built, fat or thin, she still loved him. He was still her father, and his weight hadn't stopped him from loving her or bouncing her on his knees when she was small. Cassandra could remember, briefly, of times he would throw her in the air and catch her every time. She always did love crazy things like that even though it had her mother screaming and ripping her away from him. I'm sure everything will be alright. It might be like old times between you two again. The least she could do was be more positive for him. He gave her favorite smile and reached a hand to ruffle her hair. Father! She cried, trying to fix her hair. Mother is already angry I'm not in the wheelhouse. Surely, she'd make a riot if she saw my hair looking like a bird's nest. Like he would care. He merely laughed at that, even though he knew it to be the truth. Or are you sure you're looking pretty for Robb Stark? As she was fixing her hair, she abruptly stopped at his words. Her eyes widened by a fraction and she quickly combed her fingers through her again and shook her head immediately. Why would I want to do that? I don't know him and not hardly bit of interested to. She replied rather haughtily, much more than she intended to. She found herself cringing afterwards, pressing her hand to her face out of embarrassment. Now he really believed that she was trying her best to impress the Stark heir. Is that so? You sure ain't fooling me, girl. She slapped her other hand to her face, wanting to just disappear right then and there. He's a good lad, I hear. He'd make a good husband and I can finally have some grandchildren. Neither one of you is making it easier for me. She scoffed, loudly, making sure that he heard her. What do you want me to do? Marry Robb Stark and pop out babies left and right? You wouldn't even want me to settle into the marriage. That's what you ought to do. Frowning, she was thinking of what her mother meant by women only being wives and mothers. Cassandra didn't want any children, at least not right now. She just turned 17. Why would she want to be a mother already? Sure, there were girls younger than her that were already wives and mother, but that wasn't what she wanted. What she really wanted was to be a knight or explore the world, but she was a princess and princesses didn't get to do things like that. Doesn't matter. With a sigh, King Robert had looked over his shoulder. Get Joffrey to a horse this instant. Can't have the boy not on horseback and showing up like a weak child. One soldier nodded, turning his horse around to do the order. Cassandra knew her brother would be miffed at that. Serves him right. Robb. The gates of Winterfell had opened and the royal procession were making their way through. He stood to his father's right, like a heir does, but he couldn't help but feel troubled that Jon had to stand in the back. It was the way things were and he couldn't question it, but that hadn't meant that he had to like the unfair treatment Jon had to receive. He was their father's son too, baseborn or no. His mother would argue that it would offend the king and queen, and so he did his duty and stood there in silence. A large number of people were coming through. First it was some men of the Kingsguard, soldiers and squires, and whoever travelled with them. The first royal to appear was Prince Joffrey. He was heavily guarded with golden armoured Kingsguards around him. His eyes quickly caught the sight of him turning to directly gaze at someone, and Robb found it to be his sister. Robb looked back and forth between them, feeling quite protective of his little sister. So he seized the younger prince up, showing him that he had taken note of the exchange of looks between them. Next came the Queen's wheelhouse, which made him eye it curiously. His mother hinted of the eldest princess, Cassandra Baratheon, and she seemed to be subtly telling him to be mindful of her. He could only assume it meant to be friendly with her or that she could be a potential bride. He wasn't all too fond of the idea, for several reasons. It had nothing at all to do with the princess, but his own wishes. He wanted to love his wife, not marry a complete stranger. It might have worked out in the end for his parents, but not everyone could be just as lucky as them. Of course, what he wanted didn't mean that it would happen. It didn't matter what he wanted at all because he was their son, a true-born heir to Winterfell. If they wanted them married then it would happen, no matter the protests, no matter who the girl was. Crown Prince Stefan showed up, who quickly decided to soak up the sight of Winterfell with his eyes gawking at each and everything. It didn't surprise Robb, he had no real opinion about it. Sheltered princes and princesses were seeing the true greatness that was the North for the first time. So naturally they would be curious. Why wouldn't they? His father told him the Red Keep was much smaller than Winterfell, which seemed strange for a home befitting royalty. Everyone immediately turned their focus to who came riding up after him. It was the princess. It had to be with her hair waving like a banner in the wind and her eyes of green twinkling in clear wonder. He saw her mouthing words of awe and immediately tapping her brother's arm as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing and wanted to know if he was seeing it too. Robb immediately felt a swell of pride of that and admiration for her that she had quickly likened his home. Her face showed her genuine feelings about being here. So he watched her for as long as he could, being gratefully unnoticed by her. Is the princess riding horseback? He could hear his mother's whispering. Why isn't she in the wheelhouse? His mother was stuck on the strict rules of what it meant to be a graceful and dutiful lady. She was undoubtedly shell-shocked that such a girl didn't care and rode a horse like the men. Why is she riding a horse? Sansa seemed just as curious, absolutely mirroring their mother just now without her even knowing. Princesses aren't supposed to do that. I like her. Arya quipped, smiling as she said it from Robb could see from the corner of his eyes. Arya liked anything that was unheard of from a woman. She undoubtedly admired the girl already because of it. No doubt she'd be eager to know something more that was unprincess-like about her. The king rode in now and Robb as well as all of Winterfell had bent the knee before him. To say Robb was shocked by the state his king was in would be an understatement. How did the king get so fat? It sounded preposterous to believe that this was the man that killed Rhaegar Targaryen with his warhammer. He might have been strong to lift the thing still, but give him a push and he'd struggle to get himself back up. And this was the man that he was named after. It was really disappointing to him. King Robert, when off his horse, walked over to them and told his father and the rest of Winterfell to rise with just a simple motion of his hand. His eyes quickly observed the stare-off between his father and his old friend, their expressions solemn and some silence between them. Your Grace, said Eddard, bowing his head respectfully out propriety. Silence still ensued and the king's hard stare never stopped. It almost had Robb feeling nervous, wondering why they hardly behaved like the friends he once heard as a boy that they were. They had left on rather harsh terms, he also knew, but wasn't it all behind them now? His fears eradicated as the king uttered, "You got fat." He smiled at the friendliness, his father inclining his head to gesture at the man's own stomach with a look. He nearly wanted to smile when the tension broken and the two laughed, briefly hugging like old friends. It wasn't that rare to see his father so relaxed and smiling, still it always made Rob curious how his father was around his friends. Around a person that he considered like a brother to him. His eyes looked away from the two and to gaze back at the princess, who was helped off her hose by a man of the king's guard. She thanked him with a smile before walking towards her twin, immediately clutching his arm and speaking to him. Before he could attempt to read their mouths, the king had stepped his way over towards him and ripped his attention away from the royal children. "Who have we here?" Looking him over, he reached out for his hand to shake. "You must be Rob." Rob gave the king a firm handshake, giving a quick nod to confirm the king's words. He soon traveled down the line towards Sansa, Arya, and Bran. Rob took one glance at the queen, noticing the stark difference between mother and daughter. He couldn't even go into details about it because his attention was soon caught by the king once again. "Take me to your crypts," he said, "I wish to pay my respects." Rob knew that this meant that he wanted to see his aunt right away. Why wouldn't he know that? His aunt was part of the greater reason of the whole rebellion other than what happened to his grandfather and uncle. The queen, however, did not take kindly to this and he respectfully knew why. "We have been riding for a month, my love." Rob glanced towards the prince and princess, who eyed their parents with strange looks. Surely the dead can wait. Their mother was ignored and his father was beckoned. The older princess frowned at this and looked away, and he wondered if she resented his aunt at that moment for the power she still had after her death. Everyone had begun to disseminate, going about their own way and servants and others alike unpacking and other duties to be fulfilled now that the royal family was here. Walthian whistled as he sauntered his way over, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him rather eagerly. "She's all they said she'd be." Before their arrival, they had talked about the royal family while they were getting shaved to look pristine for them. All they had known about the family was rumors, and the rumors that centered around the princess was her beauty and enchanting ways of dance. The crown prince was said to be friendly and gifted with a sword. The others they hadn't heard much about except that Prince Joffrey was said to be a prick. Speaking of getting pristine, Rob certainly missed his beard and didn't much care for being barefaced. He thought it made him look babyish and not the man that he was. "She's possibly the only one that looks Baratheon," Jon commented, always being outside of things when it came to situations like this. "The rest of them have the Lannister look. Blonde, 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 and she being the only dark-haired one. She stood out the most among them with that alone." Arya wasted no time to quickly stride herself towards the princess, possibly with a whole list of questions due to the style she arrived in coming to the forefront of her mind. Seeing as how Arya had a knack for not being proper with her words and unintentionally insulting people, Rob quickly ran after her. "Princess!" His sister called out to her, "Princess Cassandra." Upon hearing her name called, the dark-haired royal had twirled to face Arya with her brows raised curiously. She curtsied and Arya hurriedly did too. "Lady Arya, right?" Cassandra said with a tilt of her head before her eyes traveled up to meet his, leaving him rather stunned for a split second and quickly gathering himself. "And Lord Rob?" "Indeed I am, Princess." With a smile, he bowed halfway and hoped that eased things. Perhaps he did, since he was given a smile in return. Prince Stefan looked at him curiously, raising a brow. Naturally, he might have felt protective of his sister and wouldn't like the idea of a man stepping towards her. But he smiled and stretched out his hand, offering a handshake. "It is an honor to meet you, Prince Stefan." He shook his hand and suddenly felt her iron grip. He raised his head to look back at the deep blue eyes of the crown prince, who was studying him for a possible reaction. "Nice meeting you as well." As much as he sounded friendly, though his handshake said otherwise. "Please, call me Stefan though. I don't much care or feel the need of titles. My sister and I wish to be well acquainted with the Stark family just like our king father. What I mean is for us to become good friends." "Right." Rob strengthened his grip, showing that he would not be intimidated, prince or no. This made the Baratheon royal look rather impressed and promptly let go. Rob wondered what was to be gained from that. Was it a test of strength or a brief test of character? Surely a handshake wouldn't amount to anything, would it? "Just call me Rob then." Anyway, rolling her grey eyes, Arya then shifted her attention back to the princess. What were you doing on a horse? Princesses don't ride on horses when they have wheelhouses. I hate the wheelhouse. Cassandra truthfully admitted, rubbing her arms to get herself some warmth. Surely they weren't used to cold. He heard the south to be very warm and hot on most days, if not moderate. Your bum gets so sore in there. Same with a horse though, but I like a bit of fresh air, you know. It wasn't a princess response, and he saw Arya was eating it up. Robb looked at her bewilderingly, since she was nothing as he expected her to be. Books and story-wise is said for princesses to be meek, graceful, and dainty, with Princess Nymeria and a rare few people the only exceptions. She was nothing like what his sister, Sansa, was possibly hoping her to be. His attention then shifted to Stefan nudging his sister's side. Take Silva and Raya from the knapsack before they kill one another. Silva and Raya. Both Stark siblings question in unison, both watching the princess hurry off towards her horse while the prince folded his arms while waiting. Our Rakars. He answered, but Arya and Robb were still very much confused. Their faces said that much. Our lions. He simplified the term, and yet it hadn't made their reactions any simpler. Lions. For the second time, the both of them were in sync as the princess returned with lion cubs in her arms. Grey Wind had snarled, loudly and fiercely. He was still just a pup, though he thought himself strong and moved himself in front of Robb protectively. Cassandra slowly bent her knees and put what he learned be Rakars down onto the ground. Grey Wind looked at the both of them, his yellow eyes watching their every move as the lion siblings began to circle around him in what made Robb feel uneasy. Hey, what are they doing? He pointed, hoping that the two weren't going to team and attack him. Don't worry, they are just getting to know him. Stefan waved his hand dismissively, not seeing the dangers of what could possibly happen. Direwolves and lions were not friends, especially these kind of lions that were nothing like the kind he seen pictures of. They were white lions, something he never knew existed before today. Cassandra kept her knees bent, watching the trio with a fixed gaze. Raya knows better. She said protectively, defending the honor of her lion. She would never harm anyone that she didn't deem a threat to me, my family, or herself. Raya raised a paw, slowly moving it towards Grey Wind, who nudged his head against it not too roughly. Silver made its way between them, possibly not liking the interaction. Where did you get them? Why are they called Harakakars? Arya questioned, completely chopping the name of the lions to pieces. It didn't exactly roll off the tongue since it was foreign. Rakkar. Cassandra corrected her with a laugh, our uncle Tyrion gave them to us for our name day a while ago. She explained as she gave her hand to Grey Wind, letting him sniff her. Robb was surprised to see that she attempted to get his trust before petting the area between his ears, and even more surprised that Grey Wind let a stranger touch him. Harakar is the name that the Dothraki gave them, for they are native to the Dothraki Sea. That's amazing. Arya then turned, beckoning Nymeria to come over. Robb watched the direwolf pup scurry her way over with her tongue hanging out her mouth. Raya, which he assumed to be Cassandra's, was purring, rubbing its head and its body against the princess' legs. Grey Wind never did that, and it left Robb curious to what it meant for a lion to do that to its owner. Cassandra merely smirked at that act, seemingly amused by it. Does she feel threatened, sister? Stefan asked her, leaving Arya and Robb to glance at each other as they were both still lost as to what was going on. She's telling the wolf that I am hers. So that's what it meant. Lions were just as possessive of their owns as direwolves were. Scooping the lion into her arms, she had rubbed Raya's back as if to coo her. I am always yours, Raya. No need to get so jealous. Arya looked at Nymeria, who was sitting right beside her feet. How come you don't claim me, Nymeria? She asked while knowing she wasn't going to get an answer. I'm important too. Robb and Stefan laughed as the Baratheon princess then glanced over at them. I'm going to retire to my room before the feast. Nice meeting you, the both of you. With a bow of her head, Robb caught the sight of handmaidens flanking her to lead her to the apartment she would be staying in. He could honestly say he was disappointed that she didn't stay for a while because Robb was intrigued. A girl that rode horses instead of sitting pretty in a wheelhouse. She owned a lion and read up on what certain interactions had meant, and she was still so polite and outwardly friendly, even to the direwolves. Who wouldn't be interested? Since my sister really left to get herself so proper to look at, how about giving me a tour of Winterfell? I'm quite curious about this place, seeing that it already seems so big by the courtyard alone. Would you mind if my father's ward and brother tag along? He could feel Theon and Jon burning holes in his back. They wanted to question him about the princess, and what better way to make them forget about it by talking to the prince. It would give him some relief from Theon's perversions. Of course not. I heard your father had a Greyjoy for a ward. I wanted to ask plenty of questions about the Ironborn. Smiling, Robb could tell that he was going to get along with Prince Stefan already. He left a greater impression than Prince Joffrey did, seeing as he was flirting with his eyes at his little sister. Arya, are you coming with us? Arya curled her lip and shook her head. I get enough of the three of you every day. Stefan laughed at her remark as she hurried off, leaving Robb smirking. That was probably how she honestly felt. She only bothered following them when she thought they were going to train or hunt in the Wolfwoods. She's something else, isn't she? Robb said the prince as Stefan sauntered alongside him. She's very straightforward. Stefan commented, that's a gift. In King's Landing, people hardly say what they really feel. I find her blatant honesty. His eyes squinted, trying to find the appropriate word. Refreshing, I guess would be the better word for it. Cersei. How dare you decide this? Her hands were balled up in tight fists, her eyes burning bright like wildfire in the fit of her rage. How dare he? How dare he not only give her eldest daughter to Robb Stark but have her golden boy marry Sansa Stark as well? Her daughter would be ripped away from her, forced to live in this hospitable and cold country, and never be in her sights again. Never to be at arm's length, most of all. How dare he decide this? How dare he not speak to her about it when Cassandra was every bit of hers as she was his? And now Joffrey, who wasn't even his, he decided to give to Sansa. If Robert thought she hated him before, she definitely abhorred him thrice as much than she ever had before. I am the king and I will decide and do what I damn well please. That was his favorite line in every argument that they had. He was the bloody king, so what he wanted justified all the wrongness of it all. It took everything in Cersei to control herself, to not throw everything within the confines of this dreary apartment at him. Everything that laid on vanity looked like they would inflict some damage. Hell, she felt like grabbing the mirror and throwing at him as hard she possibly could would do the trick. Hopefully a piece of glass would sink itself right through his fat throat and rid of him once and for all. I don't even know why you're so upset. Robb is a good lad and would treat Cassandra like she deserves to be treated. And just how did he know that? He only assumed that because he was Ned Stark's son. And Sansa is a polite and beautiful girl. Joffrey couldn't ask for more. Sansa was a pretty girl, she could admit that, but Cersei hardly knew if the girl was well deserved to be her son's wife. That would need further looking into, and at least Joffrey wouldn't be leaving her too. Still, it hadn't changed that Cassandra would be forced to stay here and away from her. How does he separate twins like that? Cassandra and Stefan might not had the same relationship that she and Jaime had, but they had never been separated like this. Cersei could recall her lonely days, lost and alone without her brother with her and being forced to cope. At least she had gone back to a home she knew, she wasn't stuck in a foreign place with people she hadn't known and be forced to adapt in cold weather and uncivilized northerners. She had gone back to Casterly Rock with her family. Family was what Cassandra needed. The family she had known all her life. It all comes down to her, doesn't it? Cersei never wanted to breathe life to that woman again, but she couldn't help but to think that the she-wolf's ghost was further ruining her life and haunting all that remained alive. It all comes down to the fact that this is about Lyanna and how the Starks should have been your family, doesn't it? She's the one that should have been your wife. You're just so miserable with a wife such as me. I bet every time you look at our daughter you think that she is what a child with her would have been like. But Cassandra is mine. Nothing could ever be as perfect as a daughter such as mine. She was practically jabbing her finger to her chest, stressing that Cassandra was hers and hers alone. Robert was quiet, looking at her rather shocked and dazed. She knew what she was saying had struck him because he looked away from her instantly. Cassandra is mine, and that wolf whore would have never made something so perfect as her. Don't you ever think that again. Don't you dare in seven hells call Lyanna that. She was never no whore. Robert came to her defense so quickly, with his face so red from his rage. It hadn't came as surprise that back of his hand sent her face turning to the right and her cheek was aflame. Of course, he would strike her for Lyanna. He probably wanted to strangle her for calling the dead woman a whore. Robert did not hurt her anymore, her feeling long gone for him, but she was bent on protecting her children. That was the only way he could maim her heart. She stood up straight, pressing her hand to her burning face as she glared at him coldly. If her eyes had the power to kill, Robert would be nothing but ashes at her feet. I will never forgive you for that. Grinding her teeth, she kept her eyes in a deadly glare. And if my Cassandra ever writes to me that she is suffering here, I won't let you live with that. Is that a threat? Take it as you damn well please. You are, after all, the bloody king. Cersei spat and fled out of the room, knowing that if she had stayed in there any longer that she would have killed him. Cassandra. Lying wasn't something Cassandra particularly liked to do, but she did want to be by herself. There was not a trace of fatigue in her. It all came down to the fact that she just didn't like the idea that the person she just met had the potential to be her intended. So, to momentarily forget everything for a small fraction of time, she lied in her temporary bed and curled up against the soft pillows. It amazed her how warm it was inside Winterfell. Like most people that never stepped foot in the castle, she expected it to be nippy or just flat out cold. It was the complete opposite, and if she could compare it to anything, she would say that the warmth in the grey walls were something like a cozy fire that warmed you in all the right places. Burying her face deeper into her scentless pillow, she kept her eyes closed and took in the sound of serene quiet. Part of her wished that she was back at home, in the Red Keep, so that she could hear the roar of the ocean. It was such a familiar sound that it felt weird to not hear it at all. She never thought she would get the chance to miss it or have a day where the waves crashing against the rocks wasn't the constant sound she heard. Here, it was just quiet. Nothing. No ocean or the sound of seagulls and other birds to fill her ears. Nothing except quiet. Curled at her feet was Rhea, who laid atop of the furs and lazily swayed her tail side to side. Cassandra wondered, if for a moment, that Rhea enjoyed the quiet too. It was probably better than being cramped in that knapsack with a few short bursts of time to be free of it. It surprised her that the lioness wasn't roaming around, taking in the change of scenery. No, it'd much rather be by the side of his owner, who was moping about what might not even happen. Her father might not even decide it. What if he decided to marry off Stefan or Joffrey? Both of them were suitable for Sansa, despite Sansa not really of age to marry yet. They could wait for though, but she doubted her father would want to wait as long when it came to Stefan. There was a knock at her door, pulling her out of her thoughts and making her frown. She just wanted this moment alone, and now she wasn't even allowed to have that. Enter. There was a lazy tone to her voice, hoping that she wasn't loud enough and they would keep on knocking and leave thinking she was asleep. The click of the door ruined that small dream though. Swinging open the door was her handmaiden, Jocelyn, who was bringing in the last of her things. Jocelyn was considered pretty with a willowy waist and a diamond-shaped face. Her hair, golden in hue, used to be long and cascaded down to the small of her back, but she chopped it, and Cassandra had reason to believe that it was because Stefan said he liked women with short hair. It hadn't taken away from her beauty, in fact it accentuated her face and made her brown eyes much more alluring. Why are you cooped up in this dreary room? Shouldn't you be taking a tour of Winterfell like Stefan is? Rolling her eyes, she laid back down with a flop. Of course you would know Stefan's every movement. Cassandra waited until she heard the door completely shut before she gave her a piece of her mind. It had been resting on her mind for a while, and she kept waiting for Stefan to be the proper man and end it. He wasn't, and because she cared for them both, she decided to take responsibility. I wish you would end this tryst with my brother. You're lucky my mother hasn't caught wind of it yet. And what will she do? Jocelyn was surprisingly fearless, and for all the wrong reasons. Stefan is the prince and gets to lay with any woman of his choosing. A girl would be a fool to deny him. So what if he chooses me out of the hundreds? I'm sure you know my mother does not take kindly to bastards. Cassandra warned, reminding herself how quickly her mother became cold upon the mention of her father's bastards. If she think you're pregnant, real or imagined, she'll put a knife to your throat with her own bare hands. Please do not think my mother be so blind. Why were the two of them so stubborn? If meant nothing, no love involved, then why couldn't the two quit one another? It sounded like they were both in denial, acting as if their feelings weren't there because the tragedy that could ensue. Maybe it all came down to the fact that it meant nothing to Stefan, but it meant more to Jocelyn. I want it to end, Jocelyn. I can't act as if it isn't happening any longer. Stefan was her brother, her twin, and he was always first when it came to the list of people in her life. She couldn't allow him to stain his reputation like their father did, leaving bastards all over the place. Not because they would be bastards, but because the world did not need any more children struggling under a bastard title. Edric and Maya were the lucky few, but not the rest of them were. The rest of them. Cassandra wasn't even sure if his father even knew their names, let alone their faces. He hardly remembered what Edric looked like and the own presents he gave him for his name days. I mean it. It was obvious that she was trying to hide her hurt. Jocelyn gave a weak nod and began to unpack her last bit of clothes with a bit of a rush. She kept one dress out, probably for the feast tonight to welcome them, and it only made the guilt grow heavier. It was one of her favorite dresses that she hadn't worn yet, saving it for a special occasion. This wasn't what she would have thought she would wear it for, but what use was it to keep it unworn? As soon as she was finished, she politely bowed her head. I'll return when it is time for you to be dressed. And just like that, she was left her by herself again. Now she was feeling wrong, like she had said and something that she shouldn't have. Why did doing the right thing feel wrong sometimes? Hurting people for good intentions seemed like the worst thing to do. She was right about this, but she felt wrong. Am I wrong, Raya? She asked the lion, who raised its head and looked at her with its cloudy grey eyes. The sound it made was much like a cat trying to roar. Cassandra then began to rub her temples, thinking herself crazy for her to be talking to an animal. I'm losing my mind. Stefan. There was lot to tell in Winterfell, much to his surprise. Hearing the story of how the walls were warmed by a pipe that was built through the walls connected by the hot springs that served so many purposes. Not only did the hot spring keep the castle warm, but it made the glass gardens habitable for fruits and vegetables to be grown. It was amazing how such northerns had used the resources around them to have lived for so long. No wonder how such an old house was able to last this long. It left Stefan wondering if he could use anything he learned back at King's Landing. He doubted it, since his main source of problem was how to deal with the sewer system that was becoming so much of a problem that it was impossible to ignore. Who cares about who built what? Theon interrupted, causing Stefan to curiously glance over at him. You should be spending your time in the bars and whorehouse. That's where the real fun is, my prince. The northern girls could teach you a thing or two you'd never seen south. What he learned thus far of Theon Greyjoy was that all he cared about was archery and women. He lived a rather simple life and also bragged about the home he hadn't seen since he was 7. Still, he knew a great deal about the Iron Islands. It seemed as though his memory hadn't diluted over time he spent away, much to his surprise. There's more to life than that, Theon. Jon was possibly the most gloomiest person Stefan had ever met. He could understand why, being a bastard and all wasn't something someone would be proud of considering how denied they were. And he had no idea about his home life or who his mother even was. Stefan knew better than to ask, but the curiosity was nearly getting the better of him. Oh, like what? Being moody and letting your cock shrivel up. What's the point of having it if you won't use it, Snow? Robb looked almost annoyed by their bickering, and at the same time, he seemed used to it. Seeing as Jon and Theon were in tight with their verbal spar, Stefan thought it'd be a good and slim chance to find out what kind of person he was. One day you'll be the warden and I the king. Stefan commented the obvious, almost like our fathers never really left. Robb took that into though, nodding once he realized it. Hopefully we won't need to go to any wars. You think such a peaceful reign will last? Crossing his arms, he leaned against a nearby tree with his eyes staring at the bickering ward and bastard. I can only hope. Rob sighed tiredly, dropping his shoulders. But what good does hope do? Hope doesn't end someone's greed, it doesn't kill the evil that comes when it wants. Hope is what we tell the weak and the poor to believe in because they'll have nothing if they don't have that. Pushing himself off the tree, his eyes glanced over towards the stark air. Lords and kings can't believe in hope, we even can't believe in prayer, we have to believe that we'll make the right choices, hard as they may be. Just from this short conversation alone, he could tell the Winterfell heir was soft of heart. He wanted peace, no wars, and no worries. He still believed in such a frivolous thing by the name of hope, just like his sister did. How could the two of them ever be able to cope with the aftermath of a hard choice? This world would hurt them. He supposed it better they build their strength together than let her marry someone as inane Lancel. My sister Stefan noticed Rob become more alert, more interested upon the mention of her. My sister still believes in hope. She's a good person, she tries her best to believe in the good in people. Don't let that fool you though, she holds grudges. She doesn't forget a slight. The look on the Stark's face was one of thought, his brows furrowing and his mouth thinned. Not to be rude, but is there a reason why you're telling me this? I have my reasons. How Rob would take the reply was up to him, and he could tell that it left him. I've heard that the North used to have Tonys. I suppose that's a very rare thing nowadays. We haven't had one in a long time, Rob replied, at least not since I've been born. Then how does one get to Spa? With a grin, he saw the glint of determination in the Stark's eyes. Then I say prepare for one tomorrow, Stefan. The North isn't to be overlooked. Rob. Stefan's words kept meandering in his head. Why had the prince told him such random details about his sister? It was impossible for him to know that Rob had taken a modest bit of interest in her. He was only curious, but had the prince read his curiosity? As he looked over himself in the mirror, he looked over his choice of clothes. He chose grey wool trimmed in white, his house colors, stark dignity. It did feel so peculiar to be so dressed so finely from head to toe in his own home. Deciding not to think much about it, he left his room in early grace so that he wouldn't be late for the procession. From the keep, down some stairs, and through corridors, he found his way in the hallway of the great hall. Rob saw the king and his father, his mother, and his little siblings as well as the little Baratheons already there. The only ones who haven't arrived yet was the Queen and Cassandra, since Stefan and Joffrey arrived a little shortly after he did. His mother smiled at the sight of him and her hands came rest on his shoulders. You look handsome, she said with pride. Where is the Queen and Princess? He asked, trying not to feel so embarrassed about his mother smoothing out the little list of creases. Why does a mother always see a flaw in things and doesn't care who is around to see her fix it? You know how women are. The king added, his face already ruddy as he grinned. I bet they have tried on a good 100 dresses. Stefan rolled his eyes, crossing his arms as he leaned against the wall. Perhaps he knew better than to think his twin was stressing about what she wore. He didn't say anything though, letting his father to believe himself right. The sound of heels clicking against the hard floors made Rob turn, his eyes catching sight of the Queen who had her arm around her daughter in a half-embrace, speaking directly into her ear. He would have noticed the expression the princess wore, the somberness to it, if he hadn't been more interested in how pretty she looked. While the Queen dressed in her Lannister colors of gold and red, Cassandra wore the black and gold of House Baratheon. Her arms were bare, like the dress was suited for summer, and the neckline was a little dangerously low. So much so that he had to look away from her and even caught Stefan staring at him as he did. What? He mumbled, acting as he hadn't done a single thing. I'm not going to kill you for gawking, but try to at least keep your thoughts pure, Stark. That is my sister you're gawking at. A twinge of embarrassment came, but he heard the prince laugh to prove that he was only teasing. Now his face was hot with chagrin and he tried his best to keep his eyes away from the princess for several reasons now. Now let's get this over with, I'm starving. Rob believed it when the king said that. Surely, he had never been denied a meal or fasted for long. They all got themselves in place for the procession, his arms proffered to the older princess, who took his arm without once looking at him. Earlier she had been much more friendlier, speaking to him even though the words were few. Now she was a bit cold, acting as if this was a chore, and Rob wasn't sure what he had done to cause her to act like this. "Are you alright?" He kept his voice low, his head leaning towards her so that the conversation was kept between them and not heard by the Stefan before them and Joffrey behind them. "I'm fine." Which was an outright lie, and Rob knew better than to press her when she said that. She wasn't willing to give him any explanation, not like she owed him one anyway. His Lord Father had walked into the Great Hall first, escorting the Queen. Then came the King and his Lady Mother, all being led towards the high table. Rickon came first, looking quite like a little lord as he tried to walk mosey despite feeling quite shy under all the attention he was receiving. Then it was Prince Stefan, who walked by himself since Joffrey made it sure that Sansa was on his arm. If there was anyone who walked with proper grace than Rob ever saw outside his own home, it had been Stefan. He had the kind of stride that made all people watch, and he did not falter a step or slouch his shoulder by the tiniest bit. It was hard to follow him after that, especially since he was the heir and this was his home. His eyes found themselves gazing back at Cassandra, who stared straight ahead, and took the first step. She had walked in a leisure pace as he did while maintaining an aura of nobility. She politely gave his arm a squeeze, making him pay attention to the rest of the hall as they passed between tables. It was hard to keep himself not able to look right back at her. It was probably for the best, since he tried to keep his eyes from watering since they were stinging from the smoke filling the room from the kitchens. She unwound her arm from his and took a seat, leaving Rob room to breathe and quickly find his way towards Theon. He no one else to talk to this about. Jon would have been a better and much more reasonable person, but seeing as how he wasn't in the Great Hall, he didn't have any other choice. "The princess doesn't look too happy," Theon commented as he took a gulp of the summer wine. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything." Rob took a cup from the barmaid and quickly down a good quarter of the drink. "I don't know what she's upset about." "That's how women be sometimes, upset just to be upset." Glancing at his friend, he leaned back into the table and shook his head. Theon thought himself to be the expert on women. Just cause he lay abed with many whores, it doesn't mean he knew a woman's mind like a soldier knows a sword. Don't worry too much about it. She'll come around. In fact, maybe it's best she doesn't, then I can have a go at her. Out of all the things, fucking a princess would probably be the best damn thing I've ever done. His lips went from a neutral line and to a frown. "Stefan will twist your neck and I won't be there to stop him. And don't talk about her like that, she's a princess, not some Sally." The Greyjoy hadn't replied with words but his rakish grin instead. He looked back at the dark-haired girl, who had already been served her plate of food. She was eating in a very dainty fashion, consuming small pieces with such a bored look. Stefan would lean over and speak to her once or twice, but he was given one-word replies. So it wasn't him she was angry with, something must have happened. Perhaps whatever her and her queen mother were speaking about left her in a sullen mood. The music had begun to play, becoming louder now, and the king wasted no time when it came to dancing. He had his hands roaming all over a barmaid, leaving Rob stunned that the man paid no mind about his wife. The king and queen were nothing like his parents, loving and respectful. They were cold and distant, without the king caring little to none about how his actions would offend her. His eyes had meant to look at the queen, but the green eyes he found himself staring at were Cassandra's. She looked unbothered about her father's behavior, and before he knew it, he saw Theon proffering his bony hand out to her. Blinking twice, he noticed the spot that Theon was just sitting at to be empty, and now he was at the high table asking the princess for a dance. She looked at his hand and up at him in surprise, but gave him a smile and took his hand. The two of them had walked down from the dais and towards the center of the great hall. Tables were moved for them and heads were turning to look. Even the king had chose to look at his daughter. Rob wasn't sure why he felt the sudden urge to stand up, to come in between them. The other half of him was so numb and dumbfounded that all he could simply do was watch. "Theon doesn't even like to dance," he inwardly shouted, his frown growing so deep that his face might get stuck. And yet there Theon was, letting the music pull at them in a dance. Their heels clicking all over the floor as with every movement, the princess' hair had bounced and spun out with every move and timed with the beat. Since they came to the great hall, she had not smiled at him once, and yet here she was, looking as if she was never so moody. Did Theon happen to worm his way into her good favor? Forcing himself on his feet, he gave Theon just one more minute before he walked over. "Excuse me, Theon, but could I perhaps get a chance to dance with the princess?" He was being polite, but his eyes were telling his friend to go away. Theon saw the hint and looked as if he tried not to laugh before pressing his lips on the back of Cassandra's hands. "Take a chance with my young lord, princess. You'll find him almost as good as company as me." Squinting in annoyance, he watched Cassandra raise a brow. "Hopefully he'll be a better dancer." Smiling, he saw the surprise on Theon's face before he rolled his eyes playfully and let Rob take Cassandra by the hand. A new song played now, beginning very suddenly, as they began to waltz. The shuffling of their feet was slow, minding the rhythm to the music. All those lessons he learned as a boy was quickly coming at him because he feared the worst that could happen was that he would step on her feet. He even caught himself gazing down at them, watching his every step. "Look at me," she suddenly said, making his head snap up as his eyes being in a staring contest with a pair of green. "You're not going to step on my feet. I won't let you, I promise." A smile broke out on his face, chuckling as he spun her in delicate circle, her black dress billowing out. "I suppose that makes it easier," he said, "looking at you, that is." She hadn't said anything, but her smile told him that she wasn't displeased. She allowed him to spin her again, which left him noticing how agile she was on her feet. She was practically gliding across the floor so lightly as if they weren't even touching the ground. Princesses must have had much more stricter lessons, he reasoned. They wouldn't allow her to be a terrible dancer otherwise. "Are you feeling better?" It might have been nosy and he might have been stepping over his boundaries, but he wondered if she felt a little more comfortable to talk with him now. "You seem much happier now." "That's because I'm dancing," Cassandra answered almost eagerly. "It helps me forget for a little while." Pulling her back in, he noticed the sudden change in her expression. "I'm a bit surprised that you seem so happy though. I thought you wouldn't be happy either, seeing as what is to happen so soon." "What do you mean?" Before he could get an answer, the music abruptly stopped and the king demanded that all attention be given to him. The man had made few toasts, but something had felt different about this one. Cassandra had subconsciously gripped his hand tightly, her eyes lowering to look at the floor. With a grin, he drank another large gulp of the summer wine and wiped away his shiny lips and their wet corners with the back of his hand. "I have an announcement to make. A special one." His blue eyes then turned to face him, his thick and large hand beckoning the two over with a rapid curling of his fingers. "See where you two." Rob looked to Cassandra, who was sighing rather morosely. The both of them walked rather stiffly and jolted when he placed his heavy arms around their shoulders and he separated the two, the warmth and tight grip of her hand leaving his. "Ned and I have decided to wed my firstborn girl with his firstborn son next month here in Winterfell." There were looks of surprise and Rob had to stop himself from having his own eyes nearly pop straight out of his head. A round of applause and cheers soon became all that Rob could hear. All he could think of was that within the next month, in a matter of weeks, he was going to have a wife. Cassandra. It was impossible to choose the right clothing to wear because of the weather of the north. She only had a few northern-styled gowns prepared for their trip that she didn't think would become permanent for her. She wanted to avoid to wear them so that she had clothing to wear until a northern seamstress could prepare her a full of wardrobe, but with the chill, she wanted sleeves to cover her arms. So she chose the first northern dress and styled herself in Lannister red and gold. Black had such a mournful look, especially when worn on a daily basis. Cassandra didn't want to seem as if she was mourning at the fact that she was to be wed. Surely the Starks would take offense to that, especially Robb. Normally Stefan would escort her to breakfast but he hadn't came to receive her. Cassandra wondered if he found out that she gave Jocelyn an ultimatum, he was sure to be cross. Arguing with him would only go in one ear and out the other and then he'd smooth his way into getting what he wanted again. His way of words was a blessing to him but a curse to others. He knew she wouldn't out him, she loved him too much do that, and that's why she would have to teach him a lesson some way or another. Rhea remained on the bed asleep, possibly tired from chasing Grey Wind and Shadowdog last night. So she left the Rakhar to sleep peacefully. If Rhea wanted to find her, she would. As she entered the hall, leaving the guest apartments, the little Lord, Rickon, was walking alongside his older brother Brandon on to their way for breakfast. Cassandra was never exactly able to deal with children and found herself stuck on how to greet or even interact with them. They looked up to her, both their eyes swirling with curiosity, and their little heads nodding respectfully for good propriety. "Good morning, Princess Cassandra," said who she remembered to be Brandon, but was affectionately called Bran by his family. She hadn't earned the right to call him that, she supposed, so Brandon was how she would greet him. "Good morning, Brandon." Her eyes then swiftly looked towards the baby brother, who shuffled his feet. "And you too, Rukan." At least Brandon smiled. He eased that awkward tension that was making her a bit stiff with worry, and to think she'd be their good sister. She couldn't even say a well-adjusted, awkward good morning to them properly. Tommen and Myrcella were the only children she was ever comfortable with, for she had no choice really. She was good with them, somewhat, except for the time she nearly dropped Tommen when he was a baby because she had been startled by his vomiting. Her lips parted silently, trying to find a way to strike a conversation. Nothing came to mind, and she found Rukan staring at her more intensely as if trying to tell her to hurry up. She nearly laughed at that until she knew he might take offense. "Would you two like to escort me to the Great Hall? I tend to lose my way." "Of course." Brandon looked at Rukan, a warning look in his eye. They both began to walk alongside her, their pace a little quick while hers was leisurely. "Have you taken to Winterfell yet, Princess?" "Not really. It was probably better to be honest, lying at this point didn't seem well worth it. It is cold and I'm not quite used to that. I assume that once the summer is gone, it'll only grow colder, won't it?" "I don't know." His little shoulders went up and down in a shrug. "I'm a summer child, as old Nan likes to say. I've never known the winter or the autumn." His eyes met hers as he gave a gentle look. "Just the summer." There was something relieving about that. At least she wouldn't be the only one discovering the dramatic change in weather that was sure to come. "So you and I will embrace the autumn and winter together." "Maybe." The corner of his eyes creased as he smiled, "But hopefully, you'll get to see the snow before it gets to be freezing winter." "Ah, yes, snow." She nodded slowly. "I've heard so much about it." "Tell me, what's it like? How does snow feel? Does it have a taste? What can you do with it?" As Bran was about to answer, Rukan spoke up instead. "It tastes like water. Like really cold water, and it crunches when you bite and step on it." "It crunches?" Childish as it was, her eyes lit up in wonder, trying to conjure up an image of what snow was like. "So you can touch it?" "Yes." Rukan grinned. "We like to make them round and throw them at each other. They don't hurt unless you let them sit outside and they get all icy." The conversation of snow had carried them all the way to the Great Hall, with her listening to a tale of how they pummeled Robb together. It was funny to imagine as tall as Robb was compared to them, being surrounded by a bunch of children, outnumbered and unarmed. Rukan and Bran explained just how they outwitted their older brother and their father's ward, making her wonder how her and siblings would have taken to snow when they were smaller. Cassandra doubted Joffrey would have enjoyed it, but she knew the rest of them would have enjoyed hitting Joffrey. The doors of the Great Hall had opened and she saw a few good people. They were either late or early. Bran and Rukan had waved their goodbyes as she made her way towards her brother, who was sitting with the Stark boys and the Greyjoy. Avoiding him didn't hold any standing now, since she was sure her mother would never grace herself in the Great Hall for breakfast unless it was for Tommen and Myrcella. She would never come here alone, it was just unlike her. "If it isn't my twin." Stefan took a bite of bacon, crisp but not blackened. He never liked his bacon burned black like she and their Uncle Tyrion did. "Care to join us?" "Should I?" She looked at the rest of them, pretending to be mindful. Cassandra was going to sit with them whether Stefan liked it or not in the end. "I don't want to intrude. Actually, we need a woman's advice, Princess." Theon had patted the seat next to him as her twin slowly turned to gaze at the Greyjoy with a slight frown. Noticing that quick look, she took a seat next to Theon, much to her brother's displeasure. Cassandra gave the ward a pinched smile. "Tell me what troubles you." Breaking her apart his bread and sopping it into his broth, Theon returned her gaze to ask his question. "If a woman you've been with suddenly ignores you, what does that mean?" Oh, how she wanted to look right into Stefan's eyes, because she could feel waves of heat oozing right out of him. He was angry, and this question was particularly about him and Jocelyn. she knew it. So Jocelyn had listened to her and broke off her affairs with him, but he was bothered by it. Why? Because they were lovers as Theon suggested, or because it meant his time in the sun with her was brought to an abrupt end? Cassandra pretended not to know, summoning the most innocent of looks as she folded her hands neatly on her lap and sat straight up. I believe it means she has reason to move on from you, says the girl who has never even loved a man before. Her brother retorted, his eyes glittering with bridled annoyance. I've been in love before. The princess argued, I'm a girl and you're not. He asked for my counsel, not yours. With whom? All eyes were on her and she suddenly felt nervous. She purposely avoided all their gazes by averting her green eyes, Gerald Dane. Her brother visible stiffened at that, even going as far as choking on his bacon. Her lips rose in a visible smile. Gerald Dane, Knight of House Dane of Dawn, had came to King's Landing once when they were 14. Cassandra was immediately smitten with him because of his handsome features. It was when he spoke, however, that she found all her fluttery feelings diminishing as quickly as they bloomed. Maybe Stefan didn't know the latter, but he certainly knew the former. Gerald Dane. Rob repeated curiously, a relative of Sir Arthur Dane, I presume. Through marriage. Stefan quickly stressed. All my sister saw was silver hair and purple eyes, she didn't see how much of an ass he was. But I was still in love. Defiant until the end, she raised her chin in a haughty angle. Anyways, Theon, if a woman suddenly ignores you, then it is best to quit her because she is clearly quitting you. Stealing a fish off her brother's plate, she took a bite with a victorious grin. She won the first battle of their miniature war, and she was determined to win the whole damn thing. Stefan rolled his eyes and looked off into space, probably scheming on how he was going to get his vengeance. Just part of the many reasons why I don't want a wife myself just yet. Theon shook his head, obviously over the idea of proper and less sinful relationships between men and women. Why don't you worry about that until a woman can look past your ugly mug, Theon? Rob teased, ducking as a piece of soggy bread was thrown at him. The bastard Stark had looked between the both of them with a sullen look, she noticed. He didn't particularly smile often, of that she knew since they arrived. This time he looked much more serious than she noticed him look before. It wasn't within her right to pry, no matter how tempting it was to. It was the worst thing for her to be nosy, especially considering there were so many secrets kept all over the place in every part of Westeros. Abruptly, Stefan stood from his seat. I'm going to prepare for our spa later. You will be joining us, Jon. I can't. Jon immediately said, a buster. Bastard or no, I want a spa. Rob says you're the better sword, and I'd like to see for myself. Giving a quick smile and a knight's salute, he left the great hall. Cassandra blinked twice, just wondering where exactly her brother was going. Why was he off in such a hurry? Cassandra stood to follow him, gathering her skirts so that she could see what he was off to in a quicker pace. As soon as she went past the doors, a hand was wrapped around her wrist and halted her of her mission. She slowly turned to see that it was her intended. Hitching a brow, she rose her eyes to give him quite the inquisitive stare. Is there something going on between you and your brother? Things seemed a bit tense. The question was rather innocent and made her wish he wasn't so observant between what was going on between her and her brother. Why do you care? She wanted to ask. She thought it would be too rude to say it and kept her mouth shut. That's just how we play. She lied to him, forcing herself to smile. The light didn't even reach her eyes, but he seemed to take what she said as truth. I was hoping that you... Cassandra stopped him before he could finish. Would you mind giving me a tour of Winterfell? It was probably in her best interest to know the layout of this place. Also, she felt nervous about whatever he was meaning to tell her. You gave Stefan one, but I think I'm the one who truly needs it since I'll be living here for the remainder of my miserable life. She added the last bit in her head. LLL. It was colder than she imagined it would be today. Cassandra would clutch the furs closer to her as she walked alongside Rob. It was Rob that did all the talking. Whenever he asked her questions, she answered them and only asked her own with a few words every now and then. Her lack of conversation was out of her own fear of saying something silly or something mean when he was undeserving of it. Rob didn't ask for this marriage, so it wouldn't be fair to take out her frustrations on him. She was sure her father would be less than proud to see her so quiet and docile with wide eyes swirling with an overabundance of anxiety. Rob was harmless, very gentle and mindful with the utmost sense of propriety, but she couldn't say she trusted him. She didn't know him and it was her fault that she wasn't trying to. Cassandra wasn't exactly leaping and grasping at the chance to. And this is the God's Wood, where we have prayed to the old gods for centuries. There was a sense of pride in his voice as his eyes looked over the place. A September was built for my mother upon my Lord Father's request. I suppose if your faith lies with the seven, that's where you'll be praying. Cassandra's eyes soaked it all in, and it wasn't as what she thought it would be, a God's Wood of Winterfell. The one in King's Landing was much better than the one here, but she never prayed to the old gods since the faith of the seven had taken over and was the religion that her mother encouraged. It wasn't flowery as she would have thought it to be and the trees surrounding it didn't have lively colored leaves save for the heart tree. It was dark and it felt like 1,000 eyes were staring at her, judging her. Like they were banishing a stag in favor of the wolves. Stepping away from his side, she leisurely walked closer to the white tree of red leaves with her eyes observing everything in sight, from the surrounding trees and to the dark pool with a surface that would show one's reflection but not what lies deep in the waters. It was almost like it never wanted anyone to know what was within its depth, which was a saddening yet relatable thing. My mother says the one in Riverrun is much more prettier. Rob stole her attention. I'm sure you're used to sun and gardens, but it tends to be dark here in the north. The sun rarely shines, and if it does, it isn't for long. How dreary, she couldn't help but think. How could she adapt from brightness and warmth for the cold and dark? Taking a girl that only knew of things like gardens and oceans, and placing her in the barren north with strangers and an air that never knew heat. It sounded like a nightmare. Perhaps she was a little too harsh and being dramatic. One day, she might be able to find the beauty in this place. She already found the history fascinating. She could extend from that, couldn't she? Would you like to go to King's Landing one day? Curious about his answer, her hand fiddled with a red leaf from the nearest branch. The heat is constant and the sun is always present. Just speaking about her home kept her smiling. If she could stay there forever, she would. Unsure of why he smiled then, the light of it reached his eyes as he kept his gaze fixated on her. Her mind kept thinking of the brief time of fun spent between them as they danced at the feast. There was a hint of what could have been a friendship there, but it had been completely tainted by the announcement of their marriage. Now that she realized she was looking into the eyes of her husband, she felt bashful more than she felt curious and friendly. Not just that, he had been avoiding eye contact since he had been espying everything else, occasionally glancing at her when he was speaking out of courtesy. I don't care much for heat. I like the cold, winter is in my blood. And summer is in mine. It only proved that a match for them wasn't in their favor. They were as different as the sun and the moon, wolf and a lion-hearted stag. Her father should have known that such a match wasn't destined. If the gods didn't give him Lyanna Stark, why would the gods give her Robb? I wager you want to ask how I feel about it. This marriage, I mean. Cassandra stood up straight, unsure of how to answer. She paused slightly, almost thinking that his answer might not be good to hear. If he was unhappy about the possibility like she was, then she would be happy, but what if he didn't want the match because of how she looked? What if he didn't much care for her personality? He barely knew her, but did he like the little she shown him? Possibly not, she hardly gave him much to work with. I would like to know how you feel about it. She awaited her answer from the wolf pup as she heard her Uncle Jaime call him. Her uncle was always sharp and witty with an abundance of condescending nonchalance. That being said, it gave her a hard time joining his side when he didn't like a person or trust them. He didn't like Robb, he didn't like Ned. He didn't like any of the Starks, and probably wouldn't have cared if they all fell dead. I'm not excited about it if you want me honest. Her head moved in a slow nod, understanding that. I didn't want my marriage to be a thing of politics. That surprised her, her focus never shifted away from him from there on out. She was too curious, too captivated, as his eyes of ice seemed like liquid pools of warm water now. Call me simple-minded or whatever it is you can think of to insult me, but I wanted to love my wife, not force myself to. Cassandra gathered that most men didn't care who they married as long as she was wealthy, pretty, and from a great house. Rob, however, didn't care for any of that. He would rather love his wife than see her as some sort of prize for his name and family. And she felt the smile that spilled itself across her lips come naturally. Rob Stark earned her respect, and for a second, he swayed her heart. Most people dream of that. She found herself saying, looking back at the bright, red leaves of the white tree. Her thumb slid across the soft surface, loving the sensation of how it felt. To marry for love, especially noble girls. We never know how the person we marry will be, so we hope he'll be a valiant man with a soft heart underneath his armor. You've dreamt of that as well, princess. Before she could stop herself, she uttered a very defiant, no. She wished she hadn't been so open at that moment. Since she said it, she couldn't take it back. I honestly never wanted to marry. His brow rose at that, eyes glittering with shock. She nearly wanted to laugh, since she knew that hearing a girl not wanting marriage wasn't common. They would call her an spinster, an old maid that was twisted in the head. If she didn't want a husband or children, then she wasn't a well-adjusted girl. A girl couldn't live her life with her family and feel content about that. She had to make a family of her own and keep her parents proud and have honor to her name. The Lannisters weren't at all honorable, just able to strike fear and demand respect through questionable means. They would have loved to breed as many of them as they could as trueborns in great houses. Surprising, isn't it? A sigh left her lips as they pursed rather briefly. I am very attached to my twin, to my father, to my mother, and to my little brothers and sister. Truthfully, being free of Joffrey was a dream come true, but at the expense she wouldn't watch Tommen and Myrcella grow. It had hurt her. I would much rather be with them in our home of King's Landing for the remainder of my life. Cassandra wasn't stupid, and nor was she blind. She knew that such a dream was unrealistic. Having a child or being a wife was never something I dreamed or wanted, but I am a princess and we don't get to live our lives like that. Even if I were lowborn or the daughter of a lord and lady, I would still have to marry and live a life not of my choosing. You love your family that much? Cassandra nodded in reply, briefly glancing at him. I love my family too, but I'd like one of my own. You should, you have a name to carry. She reasoned, and I am just a breeder, that's what my mother says. A wife just spreads her legs for her husband and breeds him his heirs, that's all. His lips tugged downward in a frown, like he was saddened by her outlook on such a thing. What did he expect? Cassandra was sure everyone knew that her parents had not loved one another. There was no love lost between them, and she was sure everyone caught sight of that when her father went running to see Lyanna Stark's grave. That woman wasn't allowed to breathe life by just her name in the Red Keep. Her mother nearly snapped when Cassandra mentioned her when she was just a girl. Her father loved that woman, even until this day. Lyanna Stark must have been some woman to create a whole war and to haunt her father for so many years. Sometimes Cassandra wished she would just let him go, but would that make her father love her mother? She doubted it. Lyanna wasn't the only reason why her parents just didn't love one another. A wife can be much more than that, princess. Rob brought her out of her thoughts with his words, leaving her brows arched in curiosity. A wife is more than just some breeder. She is the keeper of his secrets and his biggest supporter. My mother ensures my father's happiness and gives good counsel. He listens to her and he respects her greatly. That was what a good marriage was like. Cassandra never seen it for herself. It was almost hard to believe that two people could be happy together like this for so many years. My mother and father were never meant for each other at first. They just happened to grow to love each other along the way. Could that be the same for her and Rob as well? Could she grow to love him and him to love her? Was it all just a nice thought in spite of this marriage neither of them wanted? Cassandra merely gave him a small smile. She wasn't sure if they could be as lucky. You promised my brother a spa, didn't you? Cassandra noticed his sudden smile. I'm interested in how this will go. You sure you don't want to join your sister and mine with Septa Mordane? Stitching lessons? Yes, she would rather skip it. She was surprised that the little Stark girl, Arya, wasn't doing the same. Smoothing the creases of her skirts with the palms of her hands, she rose a haughty brow. I'll have you know, Robb Stark, that I am not at all fond of stitching. I could make a nice crooked house on a embroidery hoop, but if you ask me to sew a piece of clothing, then you might as well be as bare as the day you were born." His head tilted back as he laughed, proffering his arm in gentleman gesture. "I wouldn't want be the reason a person would be forced to wear it." Hooking her arm with his, she kept up with his pace. "I'm sure Stefan was the one to have suffered. You should have been there. I tried to make him a fine golden doublet." Her eyes twinkled with nostalgia, staring absently at the soldier pine and other varieties of trees. "It looked nice when he put it on." "He looked great actually, but when he stood in court though." Her head shook, the thing started falling apart at the seams and the women started screaming like besotted girls. "My father was so angry and blamed all of the royal seamstresses." In the midst of his laughter as they walked towards the courtyard, he looked at her expectantly. "You told him it was your fault, didn't you?" "Not at first." She cringed, still remembering the hot shame that coursed through as she tried to avoid telling the truth. It wasn't until when he saw her father aiming to punish the seamstresses with whippings and more, since he thought they purposely tried to embarrass Stefan, did she stop and tell him it was her fault. "I didn't get into any trouble though. My father just started laughing and told me to make sure I stitched it right the next time, or else he'd ban me from ever touching a needle and thread. I don't believe I ever heard a woman being banned from stitching." The Stark heir smiled. "Please don't tell Arya that. She'll try do the same. She'll be my good sister soon." The both of them slightly tensed with the meaning, their hooked arms loosening from one another to gather them some space. "I ought to be a good one and teach her some tricks." "Stefan. A wooden sword." Stefan hadn't touched a wooden sword since he was 8. He used a real blade since then, which made his mother suffer a minor fit of how he was too young for live steel. His father, meanwhile, bragged about it until his face turned blue. It probably wasn't the wisest decision to let a boy so young use a dangerous weapon, but Stefan had never harmed himself too severely. A few scrapes and cuts that healed within weeks still left some slight scars on him. He was a man, he would tell his mother, and men were supposed to have scars. A man without scars is either a god or a coward, nothing in between. Even so, he looked at the neatly crafted wooden sword with an amused glint in his eye. At least he didn't have to worry about them chopping Joffrey to pieces. "Where's Robb?" Theon stood impatiently, arms crossed and his eyes scouring the entirety of the courtyard. "He should have been here. He'll show up soon." Jon took up for his half-brother, arms crossed as well as he glanced around in search for him too. Not understanding what the rush was, he figured that maybe it was unlike the Stark heir to be late. "I'm sure Robb isn't the slightest bit of scared of fighting me." Stefan remained calm, already knowing that Robb would show up eventually. What seemed to pop up in his thoughts every few minutes was where his sister could possibly be. No doubt she would be finding her way here instead of stitching lessons, which she severely needed. He still couldn't quite forget the embarrassment of his clothes falling apart in court despite it being years ago. The fuss it made kept the story still whispered around the Red Keep. There he is. His blue eyes looked away from the wooden sword and up to see the young Lord of Winterfell. His smile turned into a smirk, noticing his sister on his arm and staring at him with a look that told him to stay quiet. He wouldn't though. Theon looked at the two of them before gluing his eyes on Robb. "I hope you two weren't engaged in premarital activities." Cassandra scoffed, loudly, unloosening her arm away from Robb and sharply turning. The ends of her hair whipped across Theon's face, having him savagely rub his eyes since the ends of her hair managed to get directly in them. She had done that purposely, knowing that her hair was long enough to reach him. Robb was snickering at the expense of Theon's pain. "I see you're taking a liking to Robb," he said once the gap between them was a comfortable distance between the Stark and Greyjoy. "Didn't you think you'd be so miserable just yesterday?" Stefan tousled her already messy hair, making it even more unkempt. It looked as if she climbed out of bed and didn't bother to brush it. His twin slapped his hand away, her arms akimbo now. "I don't like him in that sort." She tried to make perfectly clear, "He and I are." Cassandra paused, trying to find the proper word. He waited with a hitched brow, head slowly lowering as he waited. "Cordial," was the answer she quickly came up with and seemed quite satisfied with it as she nodded, sticking right with it. "Cordial," the Baratheon prince repeated dubiously, I'm supposed to buy what you're selling, right? I think the merchant needs a new trick if he wants to sell his wares. I'm serious, Stefan. As hard as she may try to assure him, it didn't sound at all believable. She could be telling the truth, he didn't know, but he liked to give her a hard time. That was his duty as his brother, he always reasoned. I don't really know anything about him to like him. I just know he is a nice lad, that's all. A nice lad. As if that was the proper way for a princess to speak. I think you're catching on to Maya's mannerisms, I didn't think you'd be so impressionable. Shut up. Smirking, he watched as she made her way over to where others were gathering to watch. He didn't think they would generate such a large audience. And don't lose. I won't. She smiled at his shorty, leaving him just a layer more confident than he already was. Stefan was arrogant, the prince could proudly admit that about himself. Perhaps it was in him to be, being a Lannister and all, but he was also a prince. He was raised to be the pinnacle of perfection, his whole life was spent on being better at any given task before him. It didn't matter what it was, he aimed to be an overachiever in the subject, mathematics, astronomy, history, sword fighting, and much more. It could have been much more than that. It could have been that he hated for people to look at him and not want to rely on him and to think he was incapable. What others thought of him did affect him more than he wanted, especially how his father and grandfather thought of him. Nobody knew that kind of pressure to be the son of a king that killed the Dragon Prince and the grandson of man that raised the Lannister name to a tier it never was before. Twirling the wooden handle of the sword deftly between his fingers, his eyes glanced up at the Master of Arms of Winterfell, Sir Roderick Castle. He had quite the intimidating look about him with his hair and whiskered beard white with old age. He looked like he could still take down any person that stood before him, young or old. His observations came to an end as Sir Roderick handed a wooden sword to Robb just now. The Stark was dressed in his proper house colors with a surcoat. It wasn't at all expensive like his and Joffrey's clothing, but it was made by good hands. Prince Stefan the Prince raised his head, giving Roderick his full attention. Are you ready? Yes. He answered in a clear voice, his eyes slowly looking over to his current opponent. How about you, Robb? It's too late to back out now. He was given a smirk, don't go crying to your queen mother when you get knock on your ear. With half a bow, the both of them had prepared themselves by getting into their proper stances. The excitement that Stefan felt nearly heightened. All eyes of the people within the courtyard were looking at the both of them. He glanced over to see if he could spot some faces but he hadn't seen a glimpse Jocelyn. She was really taking this avoid all contact seriously, which made him wonder what his sister must have told her. He doubted Cassandra would make such a serious threat that would scare her off that badly. Speaking of his sister, her eyes weren't even focused on him. She was looking at her betrothed rather pensively. Knowing her all his life, it left him bothered that he couldn't tell what exactly she was thinking. It didn't matter either way. What happened between her and Robb now wasn't really his business anymore unless the Stark dare lay hands on her out of harm or dishonor. He was a Stark though, and from the little he knew, he could say Robb wouldn't mistreat her. Sir Roderick lowered his hand to tell them the battle was to start, and the two began to circle one another. His blue eyes stared intensely at Robb, looking for an opening and thinking of the next attack that would come after it. There was also the process of what he would do if Robb attacked first. He had to be 3 steps ahead and not a foot behind. Robb leaped forward, taking the initiative to perform the first strike. He made the sword in a curved line to create an unbroken parry, which was met with his sword. Robb did not stop at one hit though, he kept on continuously, and Stefan gladly kept the pace of the pressure by letting the swords clash. The blonde-haired prince leaped, his footwork fast and smooth, his backward steps like a horse's prance. He managed to block every hit, quick and strong, but Robb's relentless onslaught had made him unable to be the offense and keep defense. Eventually, he managed to hold him and the two were engaged in a heated standoff. It was the battle of strength now and neither one of them was budging or winning. Robb took the initiative to press his palm to the base of the wooden weapon in order to add more force. Seeing how it could backfire, Stefan pushed a step backward with his left foot and then gained enough strength to be able to lead the charge and push Robb back several steps. The two separated. Robb winding his sword hand as Stefan raked his fingers through his hair, pushing away from his face. He should have tied it to keep it from being a nuisance, but he was too distracted by how he was going to win to do something as simple as that. Feeling tired, Stefan? Rob taunted. We've only just started. Surely the bout could have ended minutes ago if you two weren't playing around. Joffrey spoke up, standing next to Cassandra with his eyes revealing his bored look. Don't tell me, brother, that the Stark is giving you a hard time. Rob and himself exchanged a look, the both of them properly annoyed by his little brother's input. Want to speed this along, Stark? I believe my little brother is itching to fight you as well. You would give me the honor in doing that. The both of them smirked then, Joffrey looking back and forth at the both of them. And what do you mean by that? He questioned. Stefan turned to look at his brother, just reminding Rob that you'll beat him, of course. He only lied to keep his brother quiet, seeing as his sister was just about through with him since the witch incident and wouldn't shush him herself. Returning to the spa, they decided to mutually bring it to an end. Rob aimed to get him off guard, performing a sleek one-arm strike. The attack consisted on him expertly turning his right wrist upward to make the sword turn in a slight diagonal. The skill was noted by Stefan, especially since it was such an advanced one. Had it been live steel, he probably would have been short a few hairs. He might have even lost since the glint of the blade could blind an enemy to make it appear like a blur if there was enough speed given. Seeing an end to a fight right before him, Stefan settled for a downward parry. This was his strength, seeing as it can disrupt a person's balance and leave them open for a counter-attack. Rob was quite good at that, so he had to choose wisely on when to use it. Wrapping both hands on his wooden short sword like it was a longsword instead, he waited until Rob brought his sword straight down. With a down-sliding motion, Stefan parried it right on time. The Stark eyes widened in surprise as Stefan grinned at the open victory as he stepped to the right, his sword making Rob's to be forced down. Impatiently, the Stark extended his arms, and that gave Stefan enough force to quickly lift the wooden sword up off Rob's and slide it under again, forcing the sword out of his hands. Rob's wooden sword had landed on the courtyard ground with a thump, leaving Rob dumbfounded as his eyes stared at his empty hand and back at the sword on the ground. Looks like I won. It wasn't technically an easy win. In fact, Stefan was a little bit grateful it wasn't live steel. He probably would have lost if it was. But who taught you how to use a sword? That one-arm strike was done perfectly. Sir Roderick did. He answered him, not at all sore about the loss. I may have lost, but next time I'll get my vengeance. I'll be waiting. Holding out his hand, the two shook on it before he looked over to Tommen, who would prepare to fight Bran. Best tell your brother that I won't lose to him either. I don't know about that, Stefan. Jon is a better sword than I am, and if you were impressed with that then you're bound to be even more when the wind gets knocked out of you. Winding his arm, he handed Sir Roderick the wooden sword with a grin. I like being doubted, Stark. It makes the victory much more sweeter. Cassandra. You look stunning, princess. Stunning. She thought sourly, staring at her own reflection at a person she didn't really know. All she saw was this girl that was forced to wear ivory silk and Mirish lace. It was beautiful, certainly, of that she could say. The bodice, although tight enough to make it hard for her to do something as simple as breathe, had gold seams and intricate designs throughout that would make a seamstress weep when finished. It had made sense why she would wear white, for the purity of it all, but she didn't think the color suited her well. She really did miss wearing black, even Lannister red. Her hair was styled into a braided crown and then her grandmother's circlet slipped on carefully on her head. That was her favorite part of the whole outfit, the circlet. A piece of her grandmother and her father was with her, a touch of Baratheon there that not even the Starks could take away. She thought for sure that her father would be happy to see it. Perhaps this was the day he hoped she would wear it for. The handmaidens and ladies in waiting were still scurrying around, looking for the doeskin shoes of hers as she stared away at herself. It was the last time she could see herself as an unmarried, unruly girl. She would become Robb Stark's wife and be named Cassandra Stark, née Baratheon, as well as reduced in rank from princess to lady. No more proudly announcing she was the princess of Westeros, she would be the future lady of Winterfell now. They say there is snow falling from the sky, princess. Jocelyn told her, holding out one of the doeskin shoes. Lifting the skirts of her dress, she had let her slender foot slip right into it. This may be the old gods blessing your wedding. As curious as she was of snow, she thought sour of it now that it decided to appear on the day of her wedding. What could it possibly mean? Yes, I heard Lady Stark say that means great happiness and fertility, chimed Millicent, one of her few favorite lady-in-waiting. I don't want a honeymoon child. Cassandra quickly said, her eyes revealing her horror. I didn't even want to be married. Why would you think I want to be a mother already? Jocelyn couldn't help but chuckle at her present fear. Just drink moon tea. The men will be going on a hunt at dawn and then your family plans to leave on the morrow. You'll be alright to drink it. Nobody wouldn't even know. How could she say that so simply? Just drink moon tea. What if Rob wanted a child already? He already told her that he wanted a family of his own. Even if that was what he wanted, she wasn't at all ready for it. She'd drink the whole teapot if it meant she would stay without child until the idea didn't frighten her anymore. Settling into her shoes, she tried to smile in the mirror, even though it came out rather strange. The knocking at her door startled them, but Jocelyn was the one to quickly open the door. When she bowed deeply, Cassandra knew it to be her mother and smiled genuinely once she saw her. Mother. She lowered her head demurely, knowing her mother wanted her sweet and proper on this day. Even if she felt like running back to King's Landing, she would behave as was expected of her. Oh, my sweet girl, you look beautiful. Her hands cupped her face, warm as Cassandra always remembered them to be. Even your father will tear at the sight of you. She doubted that. She had never seen her father shed a single tear in her entire life. Cassandra didn't think her getting married would change that either. You think so? Still, the idea that her father would be saddened at the fact that he was essentially letting her go and would part from her did warm her heart, just a bit. Taking a seat, she sent the handmaidens and ladies-in-waiting away, letting Rhea sit across her lap. It was unusual for Circe to allow any animal to touch her, but she had taken quite fondly of the lions. She would even dare pet them, letting her queenly hands rub against their bellies, head, and back. It made her look much more intimidating too, since her mother was certainly a lioness in every single way. How do you feel? Circe questioned her softly. If you are troubled, then tell me. I had no mother there for me to tell what I was feeling. I'll give you what I didn't have. Smiling, Cassandra turned to her mother and looked down at her hands before meeting her eyes. Sad, nervous, and confused. I keep asking myself, how did I go from celebrating my name day to marrying Robb Stark? Before he was just another name and now he's an actual person that I've met and spoken to. You never told me how you feel about him. Circe briefly looking down to Rhea, who leaned into her kind strokes. I've heard that you two have spoken rather sporadically. Cassandra never gave herself time to assess what she truly made out of him. He was certainly nothing like the usual men that she met in King's Landing, foreign or West AOC. He was handsome, gentle, and very boyish. He was only serious during times where he had to be, but other than that, he was still very childish at heart, she figured out. I am fond of him. She squinted, trying to articulate her thoughts as best she could. Fond might be too strong of a word, but I already said it. She quickly thought. He has never been mean to me or perverse. All he has ever been is kind and most patient. Her mother nodded slowly, her face one of thought. I thought your father to be dashing and heroic. I was instantly besotted with him. How Robb is now might not be the same later on, Cassie. I advise you to not give him your heart so quickly. She hadn't thought of that. What if all of this was an act? What if Robb really wasn't like this but was putting on airs? Maybe she should have had her handmaiden snoop around to see if Robb visited the brothel of Wintertown often. It was a good thing, she thought, to have told her mother about this. Now she could realize just how she was being ensnared in what could be a trap. Was she really this naive? Not anymore. She was determined to discover if Robb really was as she seemed to be. To part with you breaks my heart, Cassie. Her mother's words stilled her and she immediately felt her vision become very blurry and grey. The thought to cry never crossed her mind, but just instantly hearing her mother's words had done the trick. Sniffling, Cassandra quickly tried to blink them away. You'll be here for 2 more days. She tried to conjure up a smile. It was weak, but a smile nonetheless. Let's save our goodbyes for that day. She didn't want to think that she would be alone here without family. She couldn't let her nerves be frayed by the thought, she just wanted to get this wedding over with. Circe smiled at what she was assumed was this fragile, brave face. She had let Raya down to the floor before wrapping her arms around her, her hand rubbing her back as she kissed the side of her head. I knew this day would come. I just hadn't thought it would be this soon. I have no one to blame except your father for this. Please, mother. Looking over her shoulder and at the wall, Cassandra thought of the many times she had been held by her mother. Her arms had been the one place she sought to be when she was scared or sad. Just the squeeze from her mother seemed to mitigate all those stressful feelings away. And to think this would be one of the last times she was able to see her mother for this much-needed embrace made the tears spring to her eyes much stronger now. She refused though, to let them fall and stain her face. She quickly wiped them away while they still remained in her eyes before parting her mother's embrace. I've raised you to be dutiful and to know what life expects of you. Cassandra nodded obediently, and your father has taught you strength and bravery, much more than I should give him praise for. She smiled at that, snickering at the fact her mother hated giving her father credit when it was due. But just because you're strong and dutiful, that doesn't mean you won't suffer. If you're suffering, Cassie, you must let me know. Her eyes looked up to meet her mother's, who was giving her a very expectant look. It was as if she wanted this to be a promise, and Cassandra wasn't sure if it was wise. Her mother took anything as a slight, and even if Cassandra felt dissatisfied by something, her mother was sure to blow it out of proportion. Cassandra did know, however, that she would have to appease her as she always did. I promise, mother. Good. Circe smiled and rubbed the side of her face. I'm going to go make sure Tommen and Myrcella are seated. You come down when you are ready, but do not stay here too long. Nodding again, Cassandra watched her mother leave until she was the only human left in the bedchamber. It felt like all the life had been sucked out of it and she was left to sort herself out, which she didn't feel possible. How does someone prepare to marry someone they have only spoken few times to? Essentially a stranger. Her eyes turned to Raya, who laid across her bed, lounging about. If only she were a lion, she would do what she wanted to do. Are you ready, Raya? She asked the Rakkar, who turned its head to gaze up at her. Winterfell will be your home too. The Rakkar gave her a low growl, making her wonder if she wasn't as happy about that either. Smiling, she stroked the white-haired animal and turned to walk out of the room. Once she opened the door, the lion cub jumped down and went sprinting out ahead of her. Jocelyn stood before her, smiling with a black cloak, her maiden's cloak in her hands. Cassandra had forgotten all about it. Her best friend and handmaiden had slowly and carefully draped it on her shoulders, smoothing out any creases that formed to make it perfect. Can't forget that. She escorted Cassandra through Winterfell and down to where her father stood at the doors. He was dressed much more dashingly than she would have expected, but it was his duty as king. His head slowly turned to look at her and his ruddy face was beaming with a smile. Look at you! Robert shouted as she walked towards him shyly. It wasn't a common occurrence for her father to praise how she looked. Most men looked at your face, not your entire ensemble. My little girl, finally a woman grown. He said as his large hands rested on her small shoulders. As she raised her head to look him in the eyes, she noticed that they were glassy. Her lips parted in surprise as his eyes remained crinkled, possibly trying his best not to shed a tear. She didn't think he'd be that emotional, and to her surprise he truly was. It made her heart ache, out of happiness and out of sadness. You look handsome, father. Cassandra playfully pulled at his fine doublet. You usually don't dress so sharply. For you I will, Cassie. Her entire face lit up. I'll probably spill some wine on it later cause I'm that fucking clumsy. For the first time today, Cassandra laughed. She did not doubt that her father truly meant that, even if it was spilled unintentionally. Are you ready, girl? The Starks are patient, but your mother is not. Nodding, she took his proffered arm, and watched him tap the door with his knuckles twice. Soon it opened and they both walked down the path to the Godswoods. Millicent had been right about one thing. It was certainly snowing. The sky was dark, clouded with grey, and the air was of sheer coldness that tingled down her spine. It hadn't stopped her from thinking how beautiful the crystals of ice were as they fell from the sky. There wasn't a lot, she suspected, since there wasn't enough to make the snow on the ground round like Rukun said. Her feet didn't make a crunch since a pile of it wasn't on the ground for her to step in. It seemed like a different world out here, and she watched how one snowflake fell and melt right on her nose. It scared her, making her wonder how it was perfectly intact but melted on skin. "You'll be seeing a whole lot more of this," her father said, making conversation. He was smiling down at her, possibly observing how awestruck she was of it all. Her eyes didn't look up at him, just simply enjoying how it scattered in the air as it fell. It was remarkable, and she wondered if Stefan was enjoying it all too. As soon as they met the assembled masses of